Introduction for the audiobook. The Wrath of the VOLCHOV. Dear listener, before you embark on this journey, I invite you to close your eyes for just a moment and imagine a river. Not just any river, but the VOLCHOV. Black, oily, ancient. A river that remembers. A river that holds secrets in its depths, secrets of gods who were thrown into its waters and refused to drown, secrets of wrath that did not die, but transformed. The year is 992. In the lands of Novgorod, a new faith is spreading, carried by the prince's sword. The old gods, Perun, Veles, the spirits of forest and water, are being cast down. Their idols are broken, their sanctuaries are burned, and their followers are forced to kneel before a cross that came from Constantinople. But the river remembers. The river does not forget. This is a story of three men, three warriors bound by love, loss, and a desperate quest. Ratmir, a hardened Drusinik bearing the scars of a foreign war. Dobrynya, a man haunted by a crime he buried 3 years ago. And VOLCHOV, the mute, the silent giant, whose voice was stolen at birth. They have one thing in common. On the night of Kupala, the night when the boundary between worlds is thinnest, their brides vanished, taken by the waters, claimed by a creature of fog, shadow, and ancient grievance. The Zmey Gorynych, the three-headed serpent of Slavic legend, risen from the depths to demand what was taken from him. To save their beloved, these three men must journey into the Nav, the realm of the dead, the place where forgotten gods go to nurse their anger. They will face Rusalki, who sing with the voices of drowned women, Kikimori, who dance with marsh lights, and a forest where the trees themselves remember. They will bargain with Baba Yaga, whose hut walks on chicken legs, and seek counsel from sorcerers who walk the line between two faiths. But the greatest enemy they will face is not the monster in the water. It is the truth they have buried within themselves, the crimes they have tried to forget, the secrets they have kept from those they love. Because the river does not take the innocent. It takes the ones who have something to answer for. Lyra del VOLCHOV, The Wrath of the VOLCHOV, is a dark fantasy novel steeped in the myths, folklore, and spiritual turmoil of early Rus. It is a tale of faith and betrayal, of love that persists beyond death, and of a silence that, in the end, speaks louder than any word. Anna Gogolyeva weaves a world that is at once familiar and strange, a world where the old gods never truly die, but wait beneath the water, where the boundary between the living and the dead is thinner than a hair, where memory is both a gift and a curse, and where the only way to heal the past is to face it. This is not a story of triumph without cost. It is a story of sacrifice, of choosing who to save and who to let go, of discovering that the monster you fear might be nothing more than the reflection of your own guilt, staring back at you from the depths. So, dear listener, come with us to the banks of the VOLCHOV. Hear its song, feel its cold embrace, and remember, when you throw the old gods into the river, do not be surprised if they rise again. Audiobook Listener's Guide, Glossary of Old Russian Terms and Mythological Concepts. Dear listener, before we begin our journey into the world of the wrath of the VOLCHOV, I would like to offer you a guide to the ancient words, names, and mythological beings you will encounter. Many of these terms come from the rich folklore of the Eastern Slavs, a world of spirits, gods, and beliefs that existed long before the arrival of Christianity in Rus. Understanding these words will help you feel the texture of this world, the weight of its traditions, and the depth of its conflicts. Feel free to listen to this guide once through or return to it whenever a term feels unfamiliar. These explanations contain no major spoilers, and they will enhance your experience of the story ahead. And now, let us enter the world of the VOLCHOV. 1. The world and the people. VOLCHOV, the great river near Novgorod, flowing into Lake Ladoga. In this story, it is more than a river. It is a living entity, a repository of memory, and a vessel for the wrath of the old gods. The name itself comes from the Old Russian word VOLCHOV, meaning sorcerer, a fitting name for a river that holds ancient magic. Novgorod, Nov, Gor, Od, one of the oldest and most important cities of medieval Rus. In 992, the city had recently been Christianized by Prince Vladimir, who ordered the baptism of its inhabitants. Yet old beliefs persisted in secret, particularly in the rural areas and among those who remembered the ancient ways. Rus, the medieval Eastern Slavic state, centered around Kiev and Novgorod. This is the world before Russia as we know it, a land of forest, river, and warrior princes. Kupala, the ancient Slavic midsummer festival, celebrated on the night of June 23rd to 24th, the summer solstice. It was a night when the boundary between the world of the living and the world of spirits became thin, when bonfires were lit, wreaths floated on rivers, and young couples sought each other. After Christianization, the holiday was often associated with St. John the Baptist, but its pagan roots remained. Druzhina, the warrior retinue of a prince in medieval Rus. Ratmir, as a Druzhinik, is a member of this elite military household, sworn to serve his prince, but also bound by older loyalties to the land and its spirits. VOLCHOV, a pagan priest, sorcerer, or wise man of ancient Rus. VOLCHOV, plural, were keepers of the old knowledge, runes, incantations, sacrifices, and the secrets of the natural world. With the coming of Christianity, many were killed, driven into hiding, or forced to convert. Vseslav is one of the last of their kind. Nov, in Slavic mythology, the realm of the dead, the shadow world where spirits dwell. It is not hell in the Christian sense, but a place of darkness, mist, and memory. During Kupala, the boundary between Yav, the world of the living, and Nav is thinnest, and creatures from beyond may cross over. 2. The creatures of the Nav. Zmey Gorynych, a dragon-like creature from Slavic folklore, traditionally depicted with 3 heads that could breathe fire. In this story, however, the Zmey is not a simple monster. It is the embodiment of Perun's wrath, a god who was cast into the river and refused to die. His 3 heads hold the souls of those the river has claimed. Rusalka/Rusalki, plural, water spirits in Slavic mythology, often depicted as the souls of drowned young women. In folk belief, they were beautiful but dangerous. They would sing to travelers and lure them to watery deaths. In this story, they are servants of the Zmey, guardians of the drowned. Kikimora/Kikimori, plural, marsh or house spirits, often depicted as small, grotesque women. They were known to cause nightmares, tangle hair, and mislead travelers with will-o'-the-wisps. In this story, they guard the marsh with their dancing lights. Leshi, the guardian spirit of the forest in Slavic folklore. He appears as a tall, moss-covered man who can change his shape. He protects the animals and leads travelers astray. Vseslav warns the heroes that they must pass through the Leshi's domain to reach the Nav. Domovoi, a protective house spirit in Slavic tradition, usually benevolent if treated well. However, the domovoi the heroes encounter has gone mad. Separated from a hearth, he has become something bitter and lost. Baba Yaga, one of the most famous figures in Slavic folklore. She is an old witch who lives in a hut on chicken legs, often serving as a helper or an obstacle for heroes. She is neither purely good nor purely evil. She tests, judges, and sometimes guides. In this story, she is an ancient power, neutral but deeply knowing, who observes the hero's journey. 3. Gods and Faith. Perun, the supreme god of the ancient Slavic pantheon, god of thunder, lightning, war, and oak trees. In 988, Prince Vladimir of Kiev ordered that Perun's idol be cast into the Dnieper River as part of the Christianization of Rus. In Novgorod, a similar act occurred when the prince's warriors threw Perun's statue into the VOLCHOV. The river's wrath in this story is understood as Perun's lingering fury, a god who is not killed, but transformed. Svarog, the Slavic god of fire, smithing, and the sky. Perun is sometimes called son of Svarog in invocations. Ratmir uses this formula when he summons the power of the flail. Veles, another major Slavic god, associated with water, the underworld, cattle, and magic. He was often seen as Perun's rival. Though not directly named in this story, his influence is felt in the watery, liminal spaces of the Nav. Christianization. The process by which Prince Vladimir I of Kiev converted to Christianity and, following his example, ordered the baptism of his people. This was not merely a spiritual change, it was a political one, aligning Rus with the Byzantine Empire and its Orthodox faith. The story takes place just 4 years after the baptism of Novgorod, a time when old beliefs were still deeply rooted. The Cross, the Christian symbol introduced by the baptism. In this story, crosses are not merely religious objects. They are powerful symbols in a time of spiritual war. An unconsecrated cross, especially one made of iron, can act as a lure for the ancient powers of the river. 4. Objects of power. Flail of Perun. A legendary weapon in this story, an ancient artifact forged with magic and bound to the power of the thunder god. Its 3 points symbolize Perun's authority. To raise it over the water is to perform a ritual of restoration, acknowledging the old god's power. Herb of Overcoming. A magical herb, sacred in Slavic folklore, used to protect against enchantment and evil spirits. The heroes chew it to resist the song of the Rusalki. Fish tooth. A talisman given by Vseslav to VOLCHOV. In Slavic tradition, animal teeth and bones were often carried as charms. This particular tooth allows the mute VOLCHOV to speak once, a precious gift that must be used at the right moment. Firebird feather. A feather from the mythical firebird, a creature of Slavic legend whose feathers glow with inner light. The feather can reveal truth and break illusions, but it consumes itself in the process, taking the holder's memory of the experience. 5. People and places. Ratmir, the protagonist. His name means peace of war or peaceful warrior, a contradiction that hints at his inner conflict. He is a Družinik, a warrior who has seen battle, but his deepest battle is spiritual and emotional. Dobrynya, Ratmir's companion. His name comes from Dobry, meaning good or kind. But he carries a dark secret, one that will test the meaning of his name. VOLCHOV, the mute warrior. His name is derived from the Greek boukolos, meaning herdsman or pastor. But in this story, it is his silence that defines him, and ultimately redeems him. Vseslav, the old sorcerer whose name means all glory or all fame. A keeper of the old knowledge, he guides the heroes on their quest, though he cannot go with them. Lada, the name of the goddess of love, beauty, and spring in some Slavic traditions. Ratmir's bride shares her name, and she embodies the love he is desperate to reclaim. Marina, Ratmir's sister. Her name comes from the same root as the goddess Marzana, the personification of winter and death. Her fate foreshadows the journey to come. Milana, Dobrynya's bride. Her name means gracious or dear. Zorjana, VOLCHOV's bride. Her name means star or dawn. Borislav, Ratmir's grandfather. A Volk who drowned in the VOLCHOV. His name means glory of the storm, a fitting heritage for a man who could speak to the river. Kuzma, a villager who disappeared into the forest years before the story begins. He has become a werewolf, a guardian of the boundary between worlds. Ivan, an old fisherman who appears in the later chapters. His name is the Russian equivalent of John. 6. Important concepts. Yav, the world of the living, the visible, tangible world. The pact. In this story, the ancient Slavs had a pact with the river, a relationship of respect and sacrifice. When the idol of Perun was cast into the VOLCHOV, the pact was broken, and the river's wrath was awakened. Memory and forgetfulness. A central theme of this story. The VOLCHOV remembers everything that was thrown into it, prayers, sacrifices, gods, and sins. To heal the river, the heroes must face the truth of what they have forgotten or suppressed. Silence. VOLCHOV's muteness is not a lack. It is a form of power. His silence has a voice, and when he finally speaks, it is with the force of a lifetime of unspoken love. The Christianization. The historical and spiritual conflict at the heart of the story. The new faith is not simply a replacement. It is a wound, and the river is the memory of that wound. The Wrath of the VOLCHOV. Anna Gogolyeva. Chapter 1. The Blood of Kupala. Summer of the year 992 from the birth of Christ. Outskirts of Novgorod. The sunset blazed upon the VOLCHOV as if the earth itself were trying to spit out the sun. The water lay black, oily, and not even a breath of wind dared to ruffle its surface. On a night like this, according to the sayings of the ancients, the boundary between worlds thinned to a thread, and the Nov crept out to breathe the air of the living. Ratmir knelt at the water's edge, sand grinding into the rough skin of his palms. He smelled mud, iron, and something sickly sweet, that stench left behind when flesh has remained too long in the heat. He knew that smell. He had smelled it near Izborsk, when they had cleared the prince's dead horses from the Krivichi. But then they had been horses. Now it was his sister. Marina lay on the damp mud of the bank, arms splayed wide as if in a final embrace with the river. Her long blonde hair, which she used to braid tight with ribbons, had come undone and spread across the water like a mantle of silver and ash. White, not from age, she had seen only 17 winters. White from terror. Her face, still ruddy and alive just yesterday, now resembled a wax mask carved by an unskilled hand. Her lips were white, her eyes remained open, but in them there was not the usual emptiness of the dead. There was something else, mocking, almost alive, as if Marina were looking at her brother and smiling with that smile she had never worn in life. "Take her away," Dobrynya said hoarsely, standing apart. He had pulled his hood down over his eyes, though the heat was unbearable. "Ratmir, do you hear me? If someone sees her, there will be trouble. A body pulled from the river on Kupala night is a sign, the sign that the water itself has taken her as bride." Ratmir rose slowly. He was huge, shoulders as broad as a man's arm, and his face, wind-scoured and sunburned, now looked carved from gray stone. On his right cheekbone a fresh scar was healing, the mark of an enemy axe that had left him alive a year ago, but had forever changed the angle at which he viewed the world. He wore no prince's insignia, though he was a Gorynych. They remained in the tower, because this was Kupala night, the night when men must show no signs of power, only shirts and belts with amulets. "She didn't go there alone," he said darkly. "She promised she would wait for me on the hill, by the fire. I left for half an hour to gather wood. I came back. She was gone, and Lada, and Milana." Dobrynya crossed himself again, awkwardly, in the Novgorod manner, touching his forehead with his thumb, not with 3 fingers as the Byzantine priests taught. He was a head shorter than Ratmir, wiry, with sharp cheekbones and clever eyes that now glistened with unshed tears. On his left temple a tattoo blackened, the protective sign of Perun, which he had gotten in the pagan years and now hid beneath his hood because the new baptism did not approve of such ornaments. "They took all three," Dobrynya said. "Your Lada, my Milana, and Vukol's Zorjana. Did you see the wreaths, funeral wreaths, of wormwood and nettle? No human hands made them." Vukol stood a little way off at the edge of the forest. He was the tallest and the most silent of the three, mute from birth, but not deaf. His eyes, usually dull and resigned, now burned with a strange green light, reflection of the will-o'-the-wisps that were already beginning to flicker over the marsh. He wore no shirt, only a leather vest, and beneath it his muscles rolled hard as oak roots. On his shoulder he carried a heavy flail, a weapon that could crush a bull's skull, but now he gripped it so tightly the iron groaned. He raised a finger to his lips, asking for silence, and pointed to the water. From the depths of the Volchov, from its blackest abyss, came a sound. It was neither a splash nor a howl. It was a breath, low, cavernous, vibrating in the chest like the tolling of a great bell under water. That sound came from where the mud disappeared into the abyss, where the bottom plunged dozens of fathoms deep, and no living soul knew what dwelt there. A voice spoke a single word, but it hung in the air like a curse. "We will come." Ratmir seized his sword. The hilt burned his palm with cold. Dobrynya stumbled backward over a stump. Vukol fell to his knees and pressed his hands over his ears, but the sound pierced between his fingers. From his throat came a deep, prolonged groan. For the first time in 30 years of life, someone heard the mute man trying to scream. He rocked back and forth, pounding his forehead against the sand, a vein pulsing at his temple. The fog rose over the river suddenly, as if the water had boiled from an invisible fire. It was not white, it was ash-gray, like the smoke of wet wood, mingling the smell of burning and damp earth. In that fog, in the middle of the Volchov, a shape suddenly appeared, enormous, of unnatural length, with 3 flickering shadows in place of heads. 6 red eyes burned in the flare of marsh lights, unblinking. The Zmey Gorynych, the one the Novgorodians believed a children's tale, the one whose bones, according to legend, lay on the bottom of Lake Ladoga chained by ice. It had emerged from the waters on Kupala night, and 3 pairs of red eyes fixed on the shore where the 3 betrothed stood. Ratmir gripped his sword more firmly. His hand did not tremble. He was used to battle, used to death, used to an enemy that came with sword or axe. But this enemy had no flesh. It was made of water, of fog, and of ancient resentment. "Don't look it in the eyes," Dobrynya whispered, gripping his shoulder. "It's the Nav. The Nav cannot bear a gaze." But Ratmir did not look away. He stared into the fog and saw, among the swaying shadows, something familiar. A face, a human face, large, blurred, with deep eye sockets and a narrow beard. The face of a sorcerer he had once known, the same sorcerer who had stood at Perun's sanctuary and held the cup of sacrificial blood. The one who, on the day of the baptism, cursed the prince and plunged into the water, saying, "The Volchov will receive me, but it will not receive your God." "The Vsevolod," Ratmir breathed. "It's you." The fog shifted, and the face vanished. Only 3 shadows remained, 3 heads that hissed like serpents and swayed their long necks. One of them bent toward the shore, and from its throat came a voice, not the deep one, but high-pitched, feminine, laughing. "The brides are waiting for you. Come, we'll sing you a song." And immediately, from the forest, 2 versts from the shore, came a crash. A branch snapped under a heavy weight, then another, and among the trees, in the deepening darkness, a shadow darted, tall, hunched, with 2 points of green light in place of eyes. Baba Yaga. She stood at the edge of the forest and watched the river, leaning on a staff wrapped in birch bark. Her mouth was wide open in a silent laugh, and a black cat, a piebald beast with emerald eyes, hopped at her feet. "Go, go," the old woman rustled, though her voice could not reach the shore. "There are 3 of you, and 3 are the brides. He who places the flail in the right hands will survive. The others, food for the fish." She turned and vanished into the thicket as quickly as she had appeared, and only the smell of dry wormwood and rotten wood remained in the air. Ratmir slowly lowered his sword. He looked at his sister lying in the mud, smiling her horrible smile. Then at Dobrinja, who trembled like an aspen leaf. Then at VOLCHOV, still on his knees, but already raising his head and looking at the water with an expression that resembled understanding. The mute man rose. He approached Mirena's body, bent down, and opened her fingers. In her palm lay a small object, wet, blackened with age. A cross. Not of copper, not of wood, of iron, crudely forged, with jagged edges. "She was baptized," Dobrinja said, looking at the discovery. "She embraced the new faith. Why did she wear a cross?" "Why?" Ratmir repeated. He took the cross and squeezed it in his fist until the edges cut into his flesh. "She wore it for protection, but the cross didn't protect her. It only attracted them." He turned abruptly and walked toward the forest without looking back, neither at the body, nor at the river, nor at the fog. "Stop!" Dobrinja shouted. "Where are you going?" "To Vyshechlav," Ratmir replied without turning. "To the old sorcerer. If there's anyone who knows how to enter the Nov and return, it's him." VOLCHOV rose and followed him. He said nothing, he never spoke, but in his hand already lay the heavy flail wrapped in rawhide. He nodded to Dobrinja, brief, decisive. "Have you both lost your minds?" Dobrinja yelled, but his legs were already carrying him after them. "We don't know what's in there. In there is not even a demon. It's wrath, the wrath of a murdered god." "Then," Ratmir said, stopping and turning toward him with eyes in which the reflection of will-o'-the-wisps flickered, "we'll give it what it asks, and it asks for blood, either ours or its own." Chapter 2. The Council of the Sorcerer. Česlav. Česlav's house stood right on the edge of the marsh, where the earth turned into an unstable bog covered with brambles and blueberries. The izba was low, almost sunk into the moss, with 3 windows closed by ox bladders instead of glass. The roof was covered with sod, on which a small, white, caryophyllaceous flower had been blooming for 2 years, a sign, according to local belief, that the house stood on an ancient sanctuary. Ratmir knocked 3 times, not with his fist, but with his palm, as taught. First 2 short blows, then 1 long. The door opened by itself, without creaking, and from inside came the smell of dried herbs, wax, and something sour, perhaps sauerkraut, perhaps holy water resting in clay vessels on the threshold. Česlav sat in a corner, on an oak bench covered with a bearskin. He was so old that his beard, white and long, almost brushed his knees. His eyes, pale blue, were faded to the point of almost appearing white, but they did not have the cloudiness of age, only a sharpness like a blade. Around his neck he wore 2 amulets, a copper cross on a leather cord, and a wooden sign of Perun carved from oak. He wore them together because, as he said, one cannot turn one's back on either of the 2 heavens. "I know," Česlav said without rising or looking at the newcomers. "The river groaned today. I heard it. 3 maidens went under the water, and 3 heads appeared in the fog." He took a sip from a clay cup of a dark liquid that smelled of honey, hops, and something bitter like wormwood. "Sit down," he motioned with his hand. "Don't stand like idols. Vukol, sit on the floor. The planks are more useful for you than the bench. Dobrynya, take off your hood. It's not cold here." Dobrynya started and quickly removed his hood, revealing the tattoo on his temple. Česlav looked at him, shook his head, and snorted. "The sign of Perun. You should have erased it long ago, and instead you still wear it. Now it doesn't protect you. It attracts you, like a candle attracts a moth." "I'm afraid to erase it," Dobrynya admitted, sitting on the bench. "My grandfather said, if you erase the family sign, the line is broken." "Your grandfather was a fool," Česlav replied without malice. "But that's not what we need to talk about." Ratmir approached the table and laid down the iron cross he had taken from Mirena's hand. The cross was cold, despite the heat, and on its surface, crusted with rust, thin lines were visible, as if someone had carved runes into it. "She wore this," Ratmir said, "for protection. But it didn't protect her. Why?" Česlav took the cross with 2 fingers, raised it to the lamp's light, and examined it at length. Then he sniffed it, like a dog following a trail. Finally he said, "Because this cross was never consecrated. It was forged by a blacksmith without prayer, without baptism of water. It is not a Christian cross. It's iron given a shape. It acted as bait, like a hook on a line. The water sensed the iron, sensed the blood of the smith who forged it, and claimed it." "Why?" Ratmir asked. "Why does the river want iron?" Česlav set down the cross and looked Ratmir straight in the eyes. "Do you remember what happened 4 summers ago, when Prince Vladimir came with his druzhina and threw Perun into the VOLCHOV?" Ratmir nodded. He remembered that day, the day the idol fell, the day the sorcerers wept and covered their heads with ash, and the warriors struck the wooden god with clubs until it shattered. Then they pushed it into the water, and the river received it, rippling and swelling like a living thing. "We threw him into the river," Česlav said. "We thought the water would dissolve the wood, make it rot. But water preserves. In her there is no time. She takes everything thrown into her and transforms it into something new. Perun did not drown. He did not rot. He became the river. His wrath, his resentment, his strength, all remained in the water and waited for its moment." He rose, went to the stove, and took out a blackened jug. He poured a dark aromatic liquid into 3 bowls. It smelled of honey, tar, and blood. "Drink," he said. "It's an infusion of Adam's root and honey from a burial mound. It will open your eyes, but know this: after, you will see what the living do not see, and you will hear what the deaf do not hear." VOLCHOV took the bowl and drained it in one breath without blinking. Dobrynya sipped in small sips, and his face turned pale. Ratmir drank to the last drop, and immediately felt the world turn upside down. Colors became more vivid, then more opaque, then disappeared entirely, leaving only three hues: white, black, and crimson. "Now," Česlav said, "look." He approached the wall and moved aside a tapestry of reindeer hides. Beneath it was a fresco, not ecclesiastical, not Byzantine, crudely carved into raw clay. It depicted the Zmey, but not with 3 heads, but with 9. And at the center of each head was a man, a sorcerer, a warrior, a woman, an old man. All looked outward, and their eyes were flooded with red. "This is not the Zmey as you understand it," the Česlav said, touching the drawing with a finger. "It is an incarnation, wrath that found a body. When we killed Perun, we did not kill a god, but a symbol. But the true God, the ancient one, the one who lived in the earth before the baptism, the one who slept under the waters, woke up. He does not ask for blood, he asks for recognition. He wants you to say, 'We were wrong, we will bring you back.'" "Bring back?" Dobrynya repeated with a trembling voice. "Bring back the idol? So the prince can execute us? So the priests can curse us?" "Not the idol," the Česlav replied. "Bring back the pact. You broke the pact with the river by throwing into it the one you revered. And now the river holds your brides, so that you may come to say, not with words, but with deeds, 'We remember. We have not betrayed. We are still men of this land, not of that one which came from Constantinople.'" Ratmir stood, looking at the drawing, and in his mind, poisoned by the infusion, images danced. His sister smiling that dead smile, Lada, his betrothed, with her hair loose floating downstream, and himself standing before 3 heads, holding the flail he was meant to deliver. "The flail," he said aloud. "I saw it in a dream. Its handle is of blackened wood, and its head is chased, with 3 points." The Česlav nodded. "It is the flail of Perun. It rests in the Zmey's nest, at the roots of the oak that stands in the middle of the marsh. If you can take it and raise it above the water, the river will calm. If you cannot, your brides will become water forever." "We will take it," Ratmir said. "We will go." The Česlav looked at him for a long time. Then he turned his gaze to VOLCHOV, who was silent and clenching his fists. Then to Dobrynya, who no longer trembled, but sat straight, teeth clenched. "Very well," the Česlav said. "But know this, you will have to walk a path that does not exist. You will have to enter not the forest, but inside the forest, where the trees intertwine with roots, and light does not pass. There lives the Leshy. He guards the boundary. If he lets you pass, you will enter the Nav. If not, you will remain in his forest forever." He approached a chest, opened it, and took out 3 objects: a small leather pouch with dried herbs, a flint stone, and a fish tooth pierced from end to end. "These are for you: the herb against the Rusalki, the stone to light a fire that only the dead can see, the tooth to speak with one who has lost his voice. VOLCHOV, it will serve you more than the others." The mute man took the tooth with a trembling hand and brought it to his eyes. On his face, usually impassive, something like wonder appeared. He looked at Vseslav, and the old sorcerer nodded. "Yes, it will help you speak, but only once. Choose what you will say." Ratmir took the pouch and the stone, hid them in his bosom, and turned toward the door. "Let's go now," he said, "while the night is not over. On Kupala night, the boundary is thinnest." He went outside, into the damp gray twilight, where the will-o'-the-wisps already burned over the marsh like the eyes of the dead, and the wind carried from the forest a low, cavernous voice singing without words. "We will come. We will come." Chapter 3. The Road into the Thicket. The entrance to the forest was like a maw. Where the clearing ended, the trees pressed together so tightly that not even a hair could pass between the trunks. But Ratmir needed only to approach, and the branches parted by themselves, creaking as if someone were pushing them aside from within. From there came not the smell of the forest, of damp, of mushrooms, of rotting leaves. It came with the smell of home, of someone else's dwelling, ancient, whose walls were of bark and whose roof was of tears. They entered as 3, Ratmir at the head with his sword drawn, VOLCHOV on the right with the flail on his shoulder, Dobrynya on the left with his bow and 2 arrows, one with a bone tip, the other of red-hot iron. The path they walked was not a path. It was a narrow strip of moss-covered earth that wound between the trunks, sometimes disappearing into the bog, sometimes rising onto hummocks where the foot sank to the ankle in warm, gurgling water. "Don't fall behind," Ratmir said without turning. "And don't count your steps. Count the trees. Every 5th tree is a turn." "How do you know that?" Dobrynya asked, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Did Vseslav tell you?" "No, my grandfather taught me. He used to come here before the baptism, looking for lost cattle. He said that in this forest the count is lost. If you start counting steps, you get confused and return to where you started. If you count the trees, you find the turn to the sanctuary." "And if you don't find it?" Ratmir did not answer. VOLCHOV brought up the rear, and his heavy steps were almost inaudible. He knew how to walk silently as a beast, despite his bulk. Now he kept turning back, toward where the light from the clearing had almost vanished among the trunks. There, in the darkness, something moved, low, close to the ground, as if someone crawled on its belly, wrestling through dry leaves. Ratmir stopped. He listened. "Do you hear that?" he asked. "What?" Dobrynya whispered. a song. It was faint, almost imperceptible in the rustle of the wind, but it was there. A female voice, high, pure as spring water, intoned a melody without words, only a prolonged sound that rose and fell like a wave on the river. "Rusalki," Dobrynya said, and his face contorted. "We've gone too far." "Don't stop," Ratmir ordered. "If you stop, they'll sing louder, and you'll follow them. Walk behind me. Look only at my back." He moved faster, almost running, leaping over roots and hummocks. VOLCHOV behind, Dobrynya at the rear. The song grew more intense, penetrating the ears, the chest, the very bones, making the heart beat to its rhythm. The voice sang of love, of caresses, of cold water that does not scald but soothes, that if you enter it, everything becomes light, and you no longer need to walk, no longer need to breathe, no longer need to think. Ratmir closed his eyes and shook his head to dispel the enchantment. He pulled from the pouch the dry herb that Czeslaw had called herb of overcoming, and put it in his mouth. The bitterness burned his tongue, and the song ceased instantly, reduced to a simple rustle of wind. "Chew," he said, passing the pouch backward. "A pinch each. Don't swallow. Hold it in your mouth until it passes." Dobrynya took it, put it in his mouth, and his face ceased to be frightened, became angry, almost irritated. "Cunning beast," he hissed. "It lures you, and then—" He did not finish the sentence, because ahead, around the bend, from behind a massive oak, emerged a wolf. But it was not entirely a wolf. It stood on two legs, though its forelegs still touched the ground. Its fur was ruffled, and its eyes, too large, too human, looked with pain and at the same time with bestial rage. Fangs long as fingers jutted from its throat, and on them saliva mixed with blood. "A werewolf," Dobrynya breathed, seizing his bow. "An upright wolf, the guardian of the boundary." The werewolf did not attack. It stood still, shifting from one paw to the other, and looked at Ratmir. In its eyes there was recognition, and that gaze pierced Ratmir to the bone. "I know you," Ratmir said, lowering his sword. "You are Kuzma? Kuzma, who lived in the village, the one who disappeared into the forest 3 years ago." The wolf growled, not threateningly, but mournfully. It nodded, exactly as a man does. "What did they do to you?" Dobrynya asked, already drawing the bowstring. "Don't shoot," Ratmir ordered. "It's not an enemy. It's a guardian." The wolf, Kuzma, turned slowly and walked along the path, occasionally looking back and whining as if calling them to follow. "He wants us to follow him," Ratmir said. "It's the way." They followed. The wolf led them among the trees, through the thick undergrowth where branches clutched at their clothes and roots tried to seize their feet. Sometimes it stopped, raised its muzzle, sniffed, and then turned sharply, and around the bend a passage opened that had not been there before. After an hour of walking, they came to a clearing bathed in moonlight that somehow filtered through the dense canopy. In the center of the clearing stood a well, old, lined with blackened wood, with a windlass from which hung a frayed rope. The wolf approached the well, sat on its hind legs, and raised a howl, long, mournful, like a dog at its master's grave. "That's not a well," Dobrynya said, looking inside. "There's no water. There's a voice." Ratmir looked too. At the bottom, in the deep darkness, there was no bottom. There was something else, a void that breathed, like the lungs of an enormous beast. And from there came a whisper, thousands of voices all speaking at once, overlapping, and each was a plea. "The Leshy," Ratmir said, and the hairs on his arms stood on end. "He has traded the path. The well is his eyes. He is watching us." He stepped back, but the ground beneath his feet swayed. The well began to grow, to widen, its edges gaping like jaws. From the depths emerged a root, enormous, thick as a human arm, covered with bark on which eyes appeared. And a voice, low, vibrating like that of an old oak, rustled. "Wary." Ratmir raised his sword. Vuchal raised his flail. Dobrynya drew his bow, and the arrow with the iron tip flew from the string and embedded itself in the root. The root convulsed, emitted a sound like a groan, and withdrew into the well. The well's edges closed, and in its place remained a stump covered with moss. "You wounded it," Ratmir said, looking at Dobrynya. "I made it angry," Dobrynya replied, and his face paled. From the stump, from every crack, a white, milky sap began to seep. It smelled sweet, nauseating, like rotten honey. And at that smell, the path they had come from began to disappear. The trees moved, closed the passage, roots wove together into walls, and the clearing shrank. "Run," Ratmir said, and they ran. They did not know where, only forward, toward where the shadows between the trees were thicker, and where the wind carried the smell of water. The wolf Kuzma ran beside them, sometimes whining and showing the way. And when their legs were giving out and their lungs burned, they emerged from the forest onto the bank of a river that flowed not downward, but upward, as if the water were liquid silver. Vuchal fell to his knees, scooped that water in his hand, and brought it to his face. It was cold, almost freezing, but when he touched it to his lips, he tasted something, bitter, salty, like blood. "The VOLCHOV," Ratmir said. "We have reached the source." And from the water, from the black, immobile abyss, 3 pairs of red eyes looked at them again. And the voice, now familiar, cavernous and yet feminine, said, "We were waiting for you. Sit down. We will talk." Vuchal clutched in his hand the fish tooth that Sieslav had given him, and felt it warm and grow hot. He knew that the moment to speak would soon come. And the little house on chicken legs, which stood somewhere on the boundary of the invisible world, turned once more toward the river. Baba Yaga sat on the threshold and stroked the black cat. "First night," she said to the cat, "they crossed the forest. Tomorrow they will dance with the kikimori. The day after tomorrow they will meet the drowned ones. And on the 3rd day they will see their brides. Then the most terrible part will begin." The cat meowed, and its green eyes gleamed in the darkness like two will-o'-the-wisps. "Yes, Mirka," Yaga laughed. "They think they are saving love, and instead they are going to die for that love which no longer exists. But let them go. The river is hungry, and wrath is not appeased with prayer. Wrath is appeased only with memory." She laughed, and the sound of her laughter spread over the marsh, mingling with the song of the Rusalki, who were already beginning their dance at the rising dawn. Chapter 4. The Hut on Chicken Legs. The river that flowed upward disappeared behind them like a mirage. They only had to turn, and in place of the silver water they found only a blanket of moss and twisted roots that resembled petrified serpents. The forest closed around them, denser than before, and the daylight, if it was day, turned greenish, sickly, like that which filters through the bottom of a marsh. They walked for an hour, perhaps 2. Time in that place lost all consistency. Minutes stretched like boiling wax, hours compressed into a blink. Ratmir felt the weight of the sword on his back, and every step was like sinking into a dream from which one cannot wake. It was VOLCHOV who stopped first. He raised his arm, pointed at something among the trees, and his eyes, which now glowed with a constant greenish light, widened. The hut was there, right where a moment before there had been only a rotten log. It stood on 2 bony legs, covered with black feathers and horny scales, clawed like those of a huge bird of prey. The legs moved slightly, creaking, imparting to the structure a slow rocking motion. The roof, covered with gray moss, had a shape that resembled a crushed human skull. The windows, small and round, were lit from within by a yellowish, unsteady light, like that of a candle about to go out. Dobrynya crossed himself, then cursed himself for having done so. "It's her," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Yaga. We found her. Or did she find us?" The door of the hut swung open with a screech that sounded like the lament of a tormented soul. On the threshold stood no one, but from inside came a voice, dry, scraping, like pebbles shaken in a wooden mortar. "Enter, brave ones, if your bones don't rattle. But first, remove the knives from your belts. Here no wounds are made that have not been agreed upon." Ratmir turned to his companions. He nodded. He laid down his sword on the grass and motioned for the others to do the same. VOLCHOV let his flail fall with a dull thud. Dobrynya laid down his bow, but kept a small dagger hidden in his boot, a gesture that the voice somehow perceived. "Fool!" Yaga croaked. "Keep it. It doesn't matter. If I want to eat you, your weapons won't stop me. Enter." They climbed the 3 steps of rotten wood, which groaned under their weight. The interior of the hut was larger than it appeared from the outside, a trick Ratmir knew because he had seen it in the houses of the most powerful VOLCHOV, where space bends to the will of its inhabitant. The ceiling was covered with herbs hanging upside down, wormwood, hemlock, red fern, and others he did not recognize, with names that perhaps no living soul remembered. In a corner, a clay stove burned without flame, emitting a dry heat and a smell of burnt bread and meat. Baba Yaga sat on a bench near the stove, but she did not look like the wrinkled old woman of fairy tales. Her body was thin, taut as a bowstring, skin thin and transparent over her bones, but her eyes, two spheres of liquid amber, were alive, terribly alive, and they watched the three guests with the attention of a spider examining flies in its web. She wore an apron of rough linen stained with something dark, and between her hands she held a spindle. But she was not spinning wool. From the spindle hung a thin, almost invisible thread, which seemed made of gray light and disappeared into nothingness. "I saw you coming," she said, without moving her lips, as if the voice came directly from her throat. "I saw you at the well. I saw you running from the roots, and I saw you drink the infusion of old Vseslav, who is more foolish than he believes, but still knows how to open the eyes of those born blind." "We came to ask for help," Ratmir said, standing before her without bowing. "Our brides were taken by the river. We want to enter it and bring them back." Yaga began to laugh. The sound was dry, broken, like the crackling of burning wood. "Your brides," she repeated, spinning the spindle. "Dear creature, your brides were not taken. They went. They walked on the water to where the three heads awaited them, and they entered as one enters a house. Did you see them smile? That was not death, boy. That was pleasure." "You lie," Dobrynya said, his voice trembling with anger. "Milana would never have betrayed me. We were to be married." "Were to," Yaga interrupted him. "But duty is a chain men forged for themselves. Women know there are sweeter chains. Water, for instance. Water does not demand oaths. Water welcomes." VOLCHOV, who until then had remained silent, stepped forward. Without speaking, he could not. He placed his hand on his chest, then pointed at the spindle. Then he brought his hand to his lips and made the gesture of one asking to speak. Yaga looked at him with an interest she had not shown until then. "Ah," she breathed, "the mute one. But not entirely, is that so? You have a tooth in your pocket, a fish tooth that will allow you to cry out a single word. But it's not yet time, glutton. Don't waste your gift on a foolish question." She rose, and her joints creaked like those of an old door. She approached a low table covered with a cloth of black wool, and placed upon it 3 small clay bowls. "Sit down. Each of you will put a drop of your blood here. Not much, just enough to make the blood speak. I want to see what you carry inside, beyond fear and anger." "Blood is life," Ratmir said cautiously. "Why should we give it to you?" "Because without it," Yaga replied with a smile that showed sharp teeth, worn like old stones, "you will enter the heart of the marsh and lose yourselves before you meet the first lights. Blood is a map. Blood remembers the way home, and if you do not leave it here, the marsh will take it all anyway. But in that case, it will drink it with your flesh still attached." Ratmir hesitated. Then, without a word, he cut his fingertip with the blade of the dagger Dobrynya had kept hidden. He took it with a quick movement, cut and returned it, and let 3 red drops fall into the bowl. The blood did not spread. It gathered into a perfect sphere, almost solid, which floated at the bottom of the bowl like a pearl. Dobrynya did the same, teeth clenched. His blood, when it fell, was thicker, almost dark, and in the bowl it stirred as if alive. VOLCHOV cut himself without hesitation, and his blood was so dark it looked like ink. Yaga took the first bowl, Ratmir's, and blew upon it. The sphere of blood rose, elongated, and became an image. A maiden with flaxen hair, walking toward the water, and behind her a man with a beard and a black cassock. The face of Vsevolod, the sorcerer who had sent them. Then the image changed. Ratmir held the flail of Perun and raised it toward the sky. But the sky was black, and from the flail rained blood. "Let's see," Yaga murmured. "You, warrior, will carry the flail, but you will raise it when all is lost. And the price of that gesture you will pay with something you do not know you have." She set down the bowl and took Dobrynya's. The dark blood rose, forming a face, a man with wide eyes, falling into a well, and on his forehead was the same sign of Perun that Dobrynya wore tattooed on his temple. "You," Yaga said, fixing Dobrynya with eyes that now had a yellow glow, "killed a sorcerer. You threw him into a well 3 years ago before the baptism, and he did not die. He became the root you encountered. You felt it, didn't you? His voice is still there, and he waits for you." Dobrynya turned pale as a rag. His lips trembled, but he found no words to deny it. "It doesn't matter," Yaga continued with a dismissive gesture. "The past is a hole that fills itself. But when you meet your Milana, she will no longer be the maiden you kissed. She will be what you made her with your fear." She let the second bowl fall and took the third, VOLCHOV's. The black blood rose like smoke, did not form human figures, but trees. A whole forest of trees that moved, that walked, that spoke with voices of bark and sap. "Ah," Yaga said, and for the first time her voice lost its mocking tone. "The mute one. You have not killed anyone. You have betrayed no one. You have been silent until the world decided to speak to you. But beware. When you speak, your voice will be stronger than that of many of the living, and it may destroy what you love." VOLCHOV looked at Yaga with his green eyes, and for a moment his face relaxed, as if he had received a confirmation he had been waiting for years. He nodded. The old witch put away the bowls, went to an inlaid wooden cabinet, and took out a small object, a claw of a black hen pierced and threaded on a leather cord. "Take this," she said, handing it to Ratmir. "The leader will wear it. When the lights of the marsh begin to dance, the claw will heat up. If it gets too hot, turn left. If it cools, turn right. If it breaks, kneel and pray, whatever your god may be, because that will be the last step you take." Ratmir took the claw and hung it around his neck. The leather was rough, and the claw was cold as an icicle. "Now," Yaga said, sitting down again, "I will keep you no longer. Outside, the lights await you. The Kakimori have already lit their fires. Do not dance with them. If you dance, you will never stop. And remember, the VOLCHOV does not want you dead. It wants you forgetful. Do not forget who you are, and perhaps you will return." As they left, Ratmir turned one last time. "Why are you helping us?" he asked. "If you are so powerful, why don't you come with us?" Baba Yaga smiled, and her smile was the shadow of a skull. "Because I do not help, boy, I watch. And because the river has already taken from me everything it could take. Now go, and do not forget, the true chains are not of iron. The true chains are the promises you cannot keep." They went out into the greenish night, and the door of the hut closed by itself. The chicken legs rose, the hut spun 3 times, and disappeared into nothingness, leaving only a circle of scorched mushrooms and the smell of wormwood. Dobrynya coughed and wiped his sweat. "I'm afraid," he admitted in a low voice. "That old witch knew everything. About the man I killed. He was a pagan priest. He cursed me as he fell." "Then," Ratmir said, fixing the claw which was now beginning to warm slightly against his chest, "we will have a chance to break that curse. Let's go." Chapter 5. The Dance of the Marshlights. The marsh had no boundaries. It stretched in all directions like an expanse of liquid glass and mud, interrupted only by clumps of sharp sedge and drowned trunks emerging from the waters like fingers of drowned giants. The air was thick, saturated with mosquitoes and a heat that came not from the sun, because there was no sun, but from the earth itself, which rotted and fermented beneath their feet. They saw the lights immediately. They danced in the distance, within arrow shot, turning on and off like blinking eyes. 1, 2, 3, then 7, then a dozen, moving in circles, tracing impossible trajectories, as if following a music only they could hear. "Don't look," Ratmir said, gripping the claw. "They are them, the Kikimori. They want to lure us." "But it's beautiful," Dobrynya murmured, and his voice had lost its hardness. "They look like souls. Souls dancing. Perhaps they want to show us the way." "Stop!" Ratmir shook him. "It's a deception. The Kikimori take the form of your desires. For you, perhaps, they are the souls of the dead you killed. For me, perhaps, they are Morena's sisters. But they are not real." VOLCHOV, who walked behind, stopped. His green eyes narrowed. He raised his hand and pointed at the lights, then shook his head forcefully. Then he tapped his temple, as if to say, "They are not outside, they are inside us." Ratmir understood. The Kikimori were not only outside in the marsh, they were in their thoughts. The more they looked at them, the closer the lights came. And the closer they came, the harder it became to look away. "Walk looking at your feet," he ordered. "Only your feet. The ground beneath us is real. Everything else is a lie." They walked like that, bent over, feet sinking into the slimy mud, the mire sucking at their boots with a wet, greedy sound. But the lights did not give up. They began to sing. A faint, childish voice, rising from the marsh as if bubbles of gas were turning into words. "Come, come, a bride awaits you. Your hands are tired, rest them on the water. The water is soft, the water is mother." Dobrynya stopped. His face had gone empty, like that of a sleepwalker. "Milana," he whispered, "is that you? Are you calling me?" "It's not Milana," Ratmir shouted, but the voice of the marsh drowned out his, and the lights drew closer still until they touched the edge of the sparse, dry ground on which they stood. The Kikimori emerged from the mud. They had no fixed body. They were compressed mist, clay that shaped itself, algae hair that intertwined with arms of foam. Their eyes were two dead coals, but their mouths, made of water lily petals, sang a timeless song, the same mothers sing to newborns and the drowned sing to sailors. Vukul moved with a speed no one would have expected from a man of his size. He grabbed Dobrynya by the collar of his shirt and dragged him back 3 steps. At the exact spot where the hunter had been standing, the mud opened like a mouth, revealing a black, bottomless whirlpool. "Have you lost your mind?" Dobrynya shouted, coming to himself. "You were drowning me." "He was saving you," Ratmir said. "Look." The Kikimori, seeing their prey had escaped, changed tactics. Their voices grew harsher, more shrill, and the lights began to spin faster, forming a circle around the 3 men. The marsh began to tremble. The water beneath their feet rippled, and every ripple was a face. Faces of drowned women, with white eyes and hair like serpents. Ratmir felt the claw burn his chest. He looked at it. It had become red hot, almost incandescent. "Turn left," he shouted, and threw himself sideways, nearly falling into a hidden ditch. Vukul followed, dragging Dobrynya. The lights, for a moment, shifted, and in the gap that opened, Ratmir saw something. A narrow path of earth, leading toward a small island of solid ground where an oak grew. An enormous oak, its roots emerging from the water like arms. "There!" he panted, and ran. The path was unstable, the water biting at it from every side, but the claw cooled as they approached. The lights remained on the opposite shore, like dogs that have lost their quarry. The Kikimori disappeared, sucked back into the mud, and the song died in a final sigh. They reached the island. The oak was ancient, its trunk so wide that 3 men with arms outstretched could not have encircled it. The bark was covered with carvings, runes, solar signs, and figures of serpents biting their own tails. "This is the center," Ratmir said, placing a hand on the trunk. "The heart of the marsh. If old Vseslav's stories are true, the flail of Perun is buried here, beneath the roots." Dobrynya collapsed to the ground, breathless. "And our brides?" he asked. "Where are they? They're not here." "They are further on," said a voice, and all 3 started. The voice came from inside the oak. From the trunk, a crack opened, revealing a dark cavity. And from the cavity, a figure moved. It was small, hunched, covered in gray hair with red, tear-filled eyes. It was a domovoi, but not the kind that protects houses. This was a domovoi gone mad, grown in a tree, far from the hearth, with no family to belong to. "The brides are beyond," the domovoi repeated, and its voice was like the rustle of burnt paper. "They went to the river, but you will not find them as you left them. They have changed. They have drunk the water. They have sung with the Rusalki. They have smiled as the dead smile." Ratmir knelt before the crack. "Can we still save them?" he asked, and his voice was almost a whisper. The domovoi looked at him with eyes that were two dying embers. "Save them?" it laughed. "But you, warrior, do not need to save them. You need to choose them. Only one will return with you. The others will remain. That is the river's pact. 3 for 3, but only one brings home what he brought." The little spirit withdrew into the cavity, and the crack closed. On the tree, among the roots, appeared an object that had not been there before. A flail of black wood, inlaid with silver, with 3 points on its top. The flail of Perun. It lay there, as if waiting. Ratmir touched it, and a shudder ran down his spine. The flail was alive, pulsing like a heart, and as he raised it, he felt the weight not of wood, but of the broken oath, of all the unheeded prayers, of all the deities who had turned their backs. "I take it," he said, "and I go to the river." He turned toward the water that surrounded the island. Beyond the marsh, beyond the extinguished lights, he felt the call of the VOLCHOV. And in the call, 3 voices, the voices of his brides, singing in unison, "Come, groom, a crown awaits you, a crown of water and forgetfulness." The night was still long, and the second part of the journey was about to begin. Chapter 6. The Blood of the Grandfather. On the island of the oak, silence was so dense it could almost be cut with a knife. The marsh lights had gone out, the kikimori had returned to the mud, and the domovoi had retreated into its cavity like a wounded animal licking its sores. Only the 3 of them remained, the black flail in Ratmir's hands, and the river flowing beyond the strip of earth, black and impassive. Ratmir sat on the oak's roots, and his fingers traced the surface of the flail. The wood was cold, but beneath his fingers he felt a pulsing, as if blood of sap and metal flowed within. The 3 points on the top were sharp, worn by time, but still cutting. On the handle, carved with a graver that must have been ancient even when the first kings ruled on the hills, were words. Words in a language Ratmir did not speak, but which his grandfather, old Burislav, who had been a Volk before drowning in that very river, 4 years before the baptism, repeated in dreams. "Reka Matuska, Otvoris, ja prines krov rodnuju," Ratmir murmured, articulating the syllables as he had heard them as a child. "River Mother, open up. I have brought blood of my lineage." "What are you saying?" Dobrynya asked, still sitting on the ground, his hands trembling with effort and fear. "My grandfather was one of them," Ratmir replied without looking up. "One of the last who knew how to speak with the water. When the prince came with the cross and the sword, my grandfather refused to be baptized. He said, 'I have promised the river my blood, and the river will hold it as long as I live.' They didn't kill him. They let him drown alone on a stormy night. But before he died, he taught me the words. He made me repeat the incantation every full moon for 3 years. I didn't understand. I thought they were lullabies. And instead? Instead, Ratmir said, raising his eyes and fixing the black water. They were the key. He rose, raised the flail above his head, and began to walk slowly around the oak, counter to the sun. Every step was accompanied by a verse, a word he did not know but felt vibrating in his throat like a song from another time. Voda, voda, sestra moja, ti pila krov deda mojego. Water, water, sister mine, you drank the blood of my grandfather. Ja prines tebe totje dar, prines tebe tuje slovo. I bring you the same gift, I bring you the same word. VOLCHOV and Dobrynya watched him breathless. Ratmir's body began to tremble, not from fear, but from something deeper, a current that came not from outside, but rose from his own bowels, from the blood he had inherited. The veins on his neck swelled, and his eyes, normally clear, grew dark as the waters of the VOLCHOV. Then, with a sharp movement, he cut the palm of his left hand with the edge of the flail, and let the blood drip onto the oak's roots. The blood did not seep into the moss. It was not absorbed. It ran down the bark as if the oak were a conduit, a channel, and headed directly for the water surrounding the island. When the first drops touched the river, the water rippled, not like a normal ripple, but as if something beneath the surface had awakened. Matsira Zemlya, Ratmir murmured, and it was the last word he spoke before falling to his knees, exhausted. The water opened. It did not open like a door, but like an eye. A long, black, deep fissure formed on the river's surface, revealing a path of slippery stone, covered with algae and shells, descending downward toward a darkness that seemed bottomless. The water rose on either side like two walls of liquid glass, trembling, held by a will that was not human. Dobrynya crossed himself, then repented and spat on the ground. "It's a passage," he said, "a passage under water. But we are not fish. If we enter, we will suffocate." "It's not under water," Ratmir said, rising with difficulty, his hand still bleeding. "It's through the water. The path is dry. My grandfather said the VOLCHOV has another bed, a secret bed, where water does not reach but flows around. It's the road the VOLCHOV used to speak with the spirits of the depths." VOLCHOV approached the edge of the path. He bent down, touched the stone with his fingertips. It was dry, but cold as ice. He raised his eyes to Ratmir, and his green eyes shone with a new light, determination. "Let's go," Ratmir said. "We have no time. The flail holds the passage open, but not forever. When my blood dries, the water will close." They descended. The steps were irregular, slippery, and darkness enveloped them immediately. The walls of water on either side were transparent, but nothing was visible beyond. Only a green darkness, dense, in which long, sinuous shapes darted from time to time. Fish? Serpents? Or something else? Dobrynya walked in the middle, short of breath, and every few steps he turned to look at the water wall, as if fearing it might collapse on him at any moment. "Don't touch it," Ratmir said. "The water is alive. If you touch it, it could suck you in." The path spiraled downward, and after what seemed an eternity, but perhaps were only a few minutes, they arrived at a cave. The ceiling was so high its end was invisible, and the walls were covered with stalactites that looked like skeletal fingers. In the center of the cave was a small lake of black water, calm as a mirror. And on the shore of the lake, seated on 3 stones, were they, the 3 brides. Ratmir felt his heart stop. Lada, his Lada was there, her hair loose and her face pale, but not pale with fear. It was the pallor of one who has ceased to feel the warmth of the sun. Her eyes, which had once been blue as the spring sky, were now black, completely black, without iris or pupil. She wore a wet linen dress clinging to her body, and on her hands were small incisions, signs of runes she had never had before. Beside her, Milana, Dobrinya's bride, and Zoryana, Vukol's betrothed. They too had changed. Their faces were immobile, and on their lips curved that smile Ratmir had seen on his dead sister's face. A smile of one who knows a secret the living cannot understand. Lada, Ratmir called, stepping forward. The maiden turned toward him. She did not rise. She looked at him, and her voice which he had heard laugh and cry, came from her lips like a whisper of wind. Ratmir, you came. I was waiting for you. I will take you away, he said. I have the flail. I have the blood. I can break the spell. But Lada shook her head slowly, and her lips widened into a wider smile. You don't have to take us away, she said. We must stay. We are happy here. The water gave us what you never knew how to give us. Eternity. Peace. Silence. Dobrinya stepped forward, pushing Ratmir aside. Milana, he shouted. Milana, it's me. I came to get you. You can't stay here. This is a place of death. Milana turned toward him, and in her black eyes there was no love, no hatred, only a calm that was more terrifying than any scream. Death, Milana repeated in the same whispered voice, is only another water. And you took me away from life long before today, Dobrinya. When you killed the sorcerer and threw him into the well, you threw me too. Every night from that day I dreamed his face. Every night his voice called me. Here, finally, I don't hear it anymore. Here, I have peace. Dobrinya fell to his knees as if his legs had been cut from under him. I didn't want to, he stammered. It was to defend myself. He had cursed me. I was young. I was afraid. I know, Milana said, but fear is not washed away with blood. It is washed only with the truth, and I will not return with you. Vukol, who until then had remained motionless, took a step toward Zoryana. His betrothed was the most beautiful of the 3, copper hair, moon-like face, but now she too was a shadow. Vukol raised his hand, touched the fish tooth around his neck. He felt the heat spreading, felt that the moment had come. He opened his mouth. For the first time in 30 years, air came from his throat not as a groan, but as a word. A single word, formed of sounds that seemed like the song of a dying nightingale. Zoryana. The name of his bride, the girl he loved without ever having been able to tell her because words were denied him. He pronounced it with such intensity that the cave's air vibrated and the stalactites trembled. Zoryana turned. For the first time, her black eyes wavered. For a moment, only a moment, white reappeared, and in that white was a spark of memory, a glimmer of what she had been. But then the fish tooth cracked. A black fissure ran through it from end to end, and it crumbled to powder between VOLCHOV's fingers. His voice died forever, and in its place, in his green eyes, a different light kindled, a silver light, cold, he had never seen before. The gift of Yaga had manifested. He had lost forever the ability to speak. But now he saw the hidden truth behind the brides. He saw the threads of water that bound them to the lake, threads thin as hair, extending from their napes and disappearing into the depths of the darkness. He saw the Rusalki hiding beneath the surface, waiting. VOLCHOV seized Ratmir by the arm, shook him, and pointed at the lake. Then he drew in the air a gesture. Cut. Sever. Free. The threads, Ratmir understood. They are bound by threads. We must cut them. But before he could move, the water of the lake began to boil. The Rusalki emerged, one after another, with long, pale arms and eyes that were two hollows without light. They were not like the Kikimori. These were true drowned women, women the river had taken, and their bodies were intact but deformed, their mouths gaping in a silent scream. And they began to sing, a song that was not a song, but a vibration that made the ears bleed, that burrowed into the brain like a worm. Leave them, leave them, they are ours. Ratmir raised the flail. The battle for their souls and for their very lives was about to begin. Chapter 7. The Song of the Drowned. The first Rusalka attacked with the speed of an eel. She emerged from the lake without a ripple, arms outstretched, and threw herself at Dobrynya, who was still on his knees, devastated by Milana's revelation. She seized him by the throat, and her fingers, long, without nails, tightened like roots. "Dobrynya!" Ratmir shouted, but he could not strike without risking wounding his companion. It was VOLCHOV who moved. With a leap that seemed that of an animal, he threw himself on the Rusalka and tore her away from Dobrynya. The creature writhed, hissing, and for an instant her empty eyes fixed on VOLCHOV's. And he saw her true face, not that of the drowned woman, but the face of his own fear, his own loneliness, his own inability to speak. VOLCHOV did not hesitate. With his bare hand he seized the thread of water that descended from the Rusalka's nape and tore it. The creature emitted a scream that was not sound but light, a white, blinding light, and then dissolved into a cloud of vapor, leaving only a handful of rotten algae on the stone. "He sees them!" Ratmir exclaimed, understanding. "He sees their bonds!" More Rusalki emerged. Now there were 7, then 12, then too many to count. They moved in a circle, their translucent bodies reflecting the cave's dim light, and their song grew louder, more piercing,
until it became a physical pain. Ratmir raised the flail and struck the first that stood before him. The flail passed through the Rusalka's body without resistance, as if the creature were made of air. But at the point where the weapon touched the invisible thread, the Rusalka split, writhed, dissolved. "We must aim at the threads," he shouted to Dobrynya. "Raise your bow and shoot where I strike." Dobrynya, still trembling, rose from the ground. His eyes were red with tears, but his hands, out of habit, found the bow and the arrow. He saw Ratmir strike a Rusalka and saw the thread stretch for an instant before snapping. He loosed the arrow. It struck the thread and the creature dissolved in a flash of foam. The battle raged. VOLCHOV moved among them like a silent demon, his silver eyes spotting the invisible bonds with superhuman precision. He tore the threads with his bare hands, and the Rusalki disappeared one after another, but the lake continued to produce new ones, as if the bottom were a nursery of damnation. The brides, meanwhile, remained seated on their stones, motionless, their black eyes watching the scene without emotion. Milana still smiled, but her smile had become a grimace of pain, as if the war around her disturbed her. "They are the source," Ratmir shouted, understanding. "The Rusalki are born from them. We must cut the bride's threads." He fought his way through the creatures, striking left and right with the flail, until he reached Lada. She looked at him with her black eyes, and for a moment the voice that came from her lips was not hers. "Don't do it, Ratmir. If you free me, I die. I am alive here. With you, I would be a walking corpse." "It's not true," he said, gripping the flail. "You are alive. You are only chained." "I am happy," she cried, and for the first time her voice had a human tone, almost desperate. "I am happy here. Don't make me return." But Ratmir could not believe her. He saw the threads, and behind the threads he saw the true enemy. A dark mass moving on the lake's bottom, a shapeless body, with 3 darker spots thrashing. It was the Zmey. It was he who held the threads. "I won't leave you here," Ratmir shouted and raised the flail. But before he could strike, one of the larger Rusalki emerged from the water and struck him in the chest, hurling him backward. The flail slipped from his hand and rolled on the stone, emitting a dull sound.
The Rusalki rushed at him, their hands scratching, their nails seeking his throat. It was VOLCHOV's cry that saved him, not a cry with words, but a roar. The mute man threw himself between Ratmir and the Rusalki, and with a circular movement broke 3 threads at once. 3 Rusalki dissolved, and for a moment the pressure on the cave diminished. VOLCHOV picked up the flail and handed it to Ratmir, but before letting go he pointed at the lake, then at himself, then at the brides. The meaning was clear. He would go into the water, reach the Zmey, cut the main threads. Ratmir needed only to protect the brides while he did so. "It's suicide," Ratmir said. "You can't breathe underwater." VOLCHOV touched his chest, then his eyes. He pointed at Yaga, then at the claw Ratmir still wore around his neck. A pact. The gift of sight gave him also the power to see underwater, to move like a fish, at least as long as the flail was near. Ratmir nodded. "Go, but come back."
Vukol turned toward Zorzhana. He looked into her black eyes, and in his silver pupils a tear gleamed. Without words, he gave her one last look, then threw himself into the lake. The water closed over him, and the surface became calm. The Rusalki, for a moment, stopped attacking. They froze, as if a superior force had stopped them. Then, from the depths, came a tremor. The lake began to boil, to seethe, and the Zmey's body began to rise. 3 heads emerged from the waters, 3 pairs of red eyes that looked at Ratmir and Dobrynya. "The mute has entered my house. You remain here, and when you see him again, you will see what I have made of him." Ratmir gripped the flail and placed himself between the brides and the Zmey. Chapter 8. The Heart of the Lake. Vukol plunged into the lake's darkness, and the world became silence. Not a silence like that of the earth, where one hears the wind or the heartbeat. It was a silence that weighed, that pressed on the eardrums like water itself. His silver eyes adjusted immediately. He saw everything. The algae swaying like giant's hair, the bones of animals and of men littering the bottom, and the dark mass, enormous, moving at the center. The Zmey Gorynych. Up close, it was not a serpent. It was a root, an immense, deformed root, rising from the lake's bottom like an upside-down tree. Its 3 heads were 3 excrescences, and in each was imprisoned a human face. The face of Vsevolod, the face of a woman with hair of algae, and the face of a child crying without tears. Vukol swam toward it. His body moved through the water with a lightness he had never known on land. He felt no need to breathe. Yaga's gift, perhaps, or perhaps the will of the flail pulsing in the distance, kept his chest full of an air that was not air, but was life. The Zmey's roots stirred when they saw him. Vsevolod's head bent toward him, and its mouth opened, emitting bubbles that formed words in the water. "You came alone, mute. You are brave. Or stupid." Vukol did not answer. He could not. But his silver eyes searched for the threads, the bonds that held the bride's prisoner. He found them, 3 threads of silver light that started from the 3 heads and rose toward the surface, toward the stones where Lada, Milana, and Zorzhana sat. Vsevolod's head laughed, a gurgling and terrible sound. "You want to cut them? But if you cut them, your brides will die. The thread is their soul, which we took as pledge. If you break it, the soul will not return to the body. It will be scattered, and the bodies will become only flesh." Vukol hesitated. Vsevolod's words were poison, but they contained truth. He had seen the threads and knew they were more than chains. They were the girl's very life. Cutting them was an act of killing. But then he saw something else. He saw Zorzhana, his Zorzhana. Her inert body, yes, but inside the body, enclosed in a bubble of light, was her true soul. The soul that laughed, that cried, that had loved him in silence for all those years, waiting for him to find a voice to tell her that he too loved her. She was alive, trapped, but alive. Vukol approached Zorzhana's thread. He touched it. He felt the warmth of her soul, her love, her fear, and he also felt her will. Zorzhana, in the bubble of light, opened her eyes and looked at him. They were not black eyes. They were her eyes, blue, and in them was a question. "Will you save me?" Vukel could not speak, but his silver eyes answered, "Yes." And then, instead of cutting the thread, Vukel did something unexpected. He brought the thread to his lips. He kissed it, and in that kiss he pronounced Zorzhana's name not with his voice, but with his soul. He felt it inside himself, like a song he had never been able to sing. The thread vibrated, it tightened, and Zorzhana in the bubble smiled. Then Vukel turned toward Vsevolod's head. His silver eyes shone with a fierce light. He pointed at the flail Ratmir held on the surface, then at himself, then made a gesture. "Wait," and he threw himself at the Zmey. The battle underwater was silent, but devastating. Vukel seized the main root from which all others grew and began to tear it. The Zmey screamed, a sound that shook the entire lake, that sent pressure waves to the surface. The three heads writhed, trying to bite him, but Vukel was fast and saw every movement before it happened. The child's head seized him by an arm and squeezed. Vukel felt the bone crack, but he did not scream. He could not. Instead, with his other hand, he tore a piece of root, and Zorzhana's thread loosened. Then another, and Milana's thread weakened. Then a third, and Lada's thread trembled. But the root was too large. Vukel understood that alone he could not break it. He would need the flail, the power of Perun. Then he did the only thing he could. He clung to the root with all his strength, and, with a desperate gesture, brought his broken arm to his mouth and bit his own flesh. His blood mixed with the water, and in the blood the root recoiled, as if burned. On the surface, Ratmir felt the flail pulse so violently it almost slipped from his hand. He understood. Vukel was fighting, and he was losing. "Hang on!" he shouted to Dobrynya. Then, with a cry that was not human, he plunged the flail into the lake, up to its hilt, and shouted the words his grandfather had taught him. "Perun, sin Svaroga, udari sneba." Perun, son of Svarog, strike from the sky. The flail emitted a flash of white light that split the cave's darkness. The lake's water parted, split, and the light penetrated to the bottom, striking the Zmey's root precisely where Vukel was struggling. The root broke with a sound that was at once a crackle and a lament. The three heads screamed, and the threads snapped all at once. On the surface, the brides fell from their stones, lifeless. Lada, Milana, Zorzhana. Their bodies lay inert, and their eyes closed. But in their mouths a breath of air. A breath, small, weak, but present. The souls were returning. And from the lake the water began to drain, to recede, and Vukel's lifeless body floated to the surface, his face pale, his silver eyes now extinguished. His chest no longer rose. Ratmir rushed into the water, wading up to his knees, and pulled him out. He laid him on the stone next to Zorzhana. "Vukel," he said, and his voice was broken. "Vukel, you can't." But Vucol did not answer. His body was cold, but on his face, for the first time in 30 years, there was an expression of peace. He had spoken. He had loved. He had fought. And now he was gone. Zorjana opened her eyes. Her eyes were blue again. She looked at Vucol's body, and a tear, the first tear of a life beginning again, ran down her face. "I heard him," she whispered. "I heard him call my name. It was beautiful." Ratmir closed Vucol's eyes. Then, without a word, he rose. The flail was still in his hand. The cave trembled. The Zmey was not dead, but wounded, and retreated into the depths, carrying its broken roots with it. But the heart of the lake was open. And beyond the lake, beyond the cave, a new light filtered through. "We must go," Dobrynya said, helping Milana to her feet. "The water is closing again." Ratmir looked at Vucol's body. He could not carry it. He had to leave it there, in the heart of the lake he had fought. But he took the flail and planted it in the ground beside him, like a gravestone. "You will stay here," Ratmir said, addressing Vucol, "with the flail, with Perun, with your courage." He turned, took Lada's hand, and led the survivors toward the light. The path underwater was closing, but one last time Ratmir looked back. He saw Vucol's motionless silhouette surrounded by the flail's light, and for a moment it seemed to him that the mute's face smiled. And then the water closed over them, and they emerged into the open air on the bank of the VOLCHOV, beneath a sky that was finally beginning to clear. The first part of their journey was over. The greatest descent into the heart of the river had only just begun. Chapter 9. The Ashes of Silence. The bank of the VOLCHOV, when they emerged, was washed by a gray and uncertain light. It was neither day nor night. It was that suspended hour which fishermen call the hour of the pike, when water and sky merge into a canvas of lead and shadows no longer have a master. Ratmir collapsed onto the damp sand, and for the first time since they had left, he let exhaustion overwhelm him. His arms trembled, his legs were like two rotten logs, and his chest burned from the shouts he had hurled into the lake. The flail was no longer there. He had left it beside Vucol, like a promise, like a seal on the water tomb of his mute friend. Beside him, Lada lay with her eyes closed, her breath light. Her body was cold, but color was slowly returning to her cheeks. Milana and Zorjana lay a little way off, watched over by Dobrynya, who did not know where to put his hands, as if touching them might break the fragile spell of return. "They are alive," Dobrynya murmured hoarsely. "They are alive, but they do not speak. They don't open their eyes." "It will take time," Ratmir replied without opening his eyes. "Their souls have been far away. They traveled farther than we did. They must find their way back to their bodies." Silence settled over them like a blanket of rough wool. The only sound was the water lapping against the shore, a lapping that now seemed less threatening, almost familiar. The VOLCHOV had stopped singing. Its wrath, for the moment, had withdrawn, but Ratmir knew it was only a truce. After a long breath, Dobrynya rose and sat on a nearby stump. His eyes were reddened, and his hands, which had loosed arrows at the Rusalki, now trembled like leaves in the wind. "I have to tell you something," he said, without looking at Ratmir. "Something I have kept silent for 3 years." Ratmir opened his eyes and looked at him. "Speak." Dobrynya passed a hand over his face, as if to dispel an image he did not want to see. "The man I killed, the sorcerer I threw into the well, he was not a stranger. He was my uncle, my mother's brother, the Volk who had taught me to read the runes when I was a child. He had taken me under his wing, shown me the secrets of the earth, taught me to speak with trees and read dreams. He was the wisest man I have ever known." Ratmir said nothing. He waited. When the prince arrived with the cross, Dobrynya continued, and his voice cracked. "My uncle refused to convert. He said, 'My faith is in the roots, not in nails.' Then the prince's warriors sought him to kill him. I found him before they did, in his hut while he was preparing an incantation to hide himself. He saw me and said, 'Nephew, help me, hide me in the well, only for 1 night. Then you will take me to the forest where no one will find me.'" Dobrynya stopped. His shoulders shook. "I helped him. I lowered him into the well with a rope, and he said to me, 'Come at dawn.' But I did not come at dawn. I came when the sun was high, and in the meantime the prince's warriors had passed. They had seen the rope, they had seen the well, and they had thrown stones. My uncle was still alive when they pulled him up, but his legs were broken and his skull was split. He looked at me, and in his eyes there was no hatred. There was only a question. 'Why?' 'Why?' Ratmir asked, and his voice was flat. "Because I was afraid," Dobrynya burst out, and tears finally flowed. "I was afraid that if they found me with him, they would kill me as a pagan. I was afraid of being burned as a heretic. I was afraid of losing my land, my home, my future with Milana. So I let him die. And when he was dead, I threw his body into the well and covered it with earth. Then I went to the priest and had myself baptized. I thought holy water would wash away his curse. But it didn't," Ratmir said. "No," Dobrynya murmured. "It didn't. Every night for 3 years I dreamed his face. Every night he asked me, 'Why?' And I never had an answer. Until today. When I saw Milana, when I saw her black eyes, I understood. My fear had killed not only my uncle, it had killed her too, because she, somehow, felt it. She felt that I was a murderer, even if she didn't know it." He covered his face with his hands, and his weeping was a choked sound, almost a child's sob. Ratmir let him cry. There were no words that could console such an old and deep wound. Instead, he rose, went to the shore, and scooped up a handful of sand. He let it fall into the water, grain by grain. "The river carries everything away," he said without turning. "It carries away blood, carries away words, carries away guilt. But it does not carry away what one chooses to remember. You chose to forget, and for that your memory has pursued you." "How can I make amends?" Dobrynya asked, raising his face stained with tears and sand. "You cannot make amends," Ratmir said. "You can only move forward, And when you meet your uncle again, and you will, because the Zmey absorbed him into its root, you must look him in the eyes and tell him the truth. Not why you did it, but how you have changed. Dobrynya nodded slowly. There was no relief in his soul, but there was a small crack of light, like that which filters through the roof of a hut after a storm. At that moment, a sound made them both start. A meowing. It came from the forest, not from the shore. A low, shrill meowing, like that of a hungry cat that knows it has been called.
Ratmir turned. Among the trees, right on the boundary between land and forest, was a black cat. But it was no ordinary cat. It was large, with fur shining like coal, and its eyes, two spheres of molten emerald, stared at him with an intelligence that was not animal. Yaga, Ratmir murmured. Her cat. The cat took a step forward, then another. It was not afraid. It approached Lada, sniffed her, then turned to Ratmir and opened its mouth. And from the cat's mouth came a voice. Not a feline voice, but a human one, thin, ancient, with the echo of one who has spoken through many centuries. Ratmir, son of Burislav, you left the flail on the bottom. That is right, but the flail was not for you. It was for him. Now he is with the river, and the river is with him. Ratmir was not frightened. He had seen too many strange things to be afraid of a talking cat. Instead, he knelt before the animal. "Who are you?" he asked. "Are you Yaga?" The cat tilted its head, and its meow mixed with the laugh. "I am what she left. I am her eye in the forest, her paw on the path. But now I speak for another voice. I speak for the voice of your grandfather, who surfaced when you spilled his blood into the water. Your grandfather sent me. He said, 'Lead them to the nest. The road is open, but the heart of the nest is still closed.'" "How does it open?" Ratmir asked. The cat sat on its hind legs and began to lick a paw, as if reflecting. Then, calmly, it said, "With another death. A death not of blood, but of memory. Someone must forget everything they have loved in order to enter. Only then will the Zmey show itself for what it truly is." Ratmir looked at Dobrynya, then at the three brides, still unconscious on the sand. "I cannot ask anyone to forget," he said. "Not after all we've been through." The cat emitted a sound that could have been a sigh. "Then you will find another way. But hurry. The river is taking itself back, and when it has fully recovered, VOLCHOV's blood will no longer be enough to keep it calm." The cat rose, turned, and with a silent leap disappeared among the trees. Ratmir remained on his knees, staring at the point where the animal had vanished. Then, slowly, he rose. "We must go," he said to Dobrynya. "The nest is near. I feel it. The Zmey awaits us." Dobrynya dried his tears and rose. Malana, beside him, opened her eyes for the first time. They were tired, but blue. Color was returning. Where?" she murmured. "Home," Dobrynya said, taking her hand. "Or at least, we'll try." Chapter 10. The House That Walks. They walked for hours, perhaps days.
Time in the enchanted forest had lost all meaning. The three brides were too weak to walk alone, so Ratmir and Dobrinja took turns carrying them on their shoulders, advancing with difficulty among roots and mud. But now the forest was different. The trees no longer tried to deceive them. Voices no longer whispered from the bushes. There was a different silence, a silence of anticipation, as if the forest itself held its breath in expectation of what was to come. Zoryana was the weakest of the three. Her body had been the farthest, the most immersed in the water, and the return of her soul had been more difficult. She walked stumbling, leaning on Ratmir, and occasionally murmured senseless words, fragments of dreams she had never had. "I saw him," she said suddenly in a distant voice. "I saw him underwater. He had silver eyes and was smiling. He was beautiful. He was not sad." Ratmir tightened his hold on her. "VOLCHOV loves you," he said. "He has always loved you, even when he could not say it." "I know," Zoryana whispered. "I know now." Dobrinja, who walked ahead with Milana on his back, stopped. "There's something," he said. "Over there." Among the trees, a shape moved. It was not a beast, not a man. It was a house. A low house with a thatched roof and log walls, walking on two chicken legs, taking one step after another, creaking like an old boat. "Yaga's hut," Ratmir said, "but it's moving away." "Or perhaps it's waiting for us," Dobrinja said. The hut stopped about 50 paces away. Its chicken legs bent, and it lowered itself to the ground, like an old woman sitting on a bench. The door swung open. From inside, Yaga's voice, clearer than ever, resounded. "Enter. I've prepared broth. You need it." Ratmir hesitated. Every time they entered that hut, something changed in them. But they were tired, hungry, and the brides could not last much longer. They entered. Inside, the hut was warmer than before. A fire blazed in the hearth, and a cast-iron pot boiled, emitting a smell of herbs and meat that made everyone's mouth water. Baba Yaga sat in her place, but this time she was not spinning. She held a wooden comb and passed it slowly through her teeth, as if counting the minutes. "Sit down," she said. "The girls on the bench near the fire, the boys on the benches. There isn't much time, but enough for a bite." Ratmir and Dobrinja laid the three brides on the wooden bench, covering them with a sheepskin that Yaga handed over without a word. Then they sat, and the old witch poured broth into wooden bowls. The broth was thick, savory, and as they drank it, they felt their strength returning, as if each sip repaired the torn tissues of exhaustion. "The Zmey," Ratmir said between sips, "retreated, but it is not dead. We wanted to kill it, and instead we only wounded it." "I know," Yaga said. "I saw it. And it saw you, too. It knows you now. It knows your names, your sins, your fears. The next time you meet it, it will not face you with Rusalki or water threads. It will face you with yourselves." "What does that mean?" Dobrinja asked. Yaga looked at him with eyes that were like two embers. "It means that when you enter its nest, you will find yourselves before 3 doors. 3 doors, 3 temptations, 3 ways to lose what you are. 1 is the door of glory. There you will see yourself as a king, a prince, lord of all the lands you ever dreamed of. The 2nd is the door of riches. Gold, silver, stones that shine brighter than the sun. The 3rd is the door of power, the strength to crush the world with a single thought. And if we open them? Ratmir asked. If you open them, Yaga said, you will lose yourselves. You will become what the Zmey wants you to become, servants of its desire, flesh of its craving. Because the Zmey is not a serpent, boys. It is the shadow of a god who was killed and never had a tomb. It does not want your death. It wants your submission. It wants you to acknowledge that the old gods are stronger than the new ones. And how do we win? Ratmir asked. Yaga rose. She went to the cupboard, took out an object, and placed it on the table. It was a feather, a white feather, long as a forearm, glowing with an inner light. With this, she said, the feather of the firebird. I found it 100 years ago when I was young and still believed I could fly. It will serve you to remember. When temptation seems sweeter than honey, touch this feather. It will show you the truth. Not the truth you want to see, but what is. Ratmir took the feather. It was warm, as if still alive. But, Yaga continued, the feather works only once per person. Use it wisely. And if we fail? Dobrynya asked. Yaga smiled, and her smile was like an opening wound. Then the VOLCHOV will have 3 brides, 3 grooms, and 1 more river of blood. But if you win, perhaps the old god will find peace, and perhaps you will too. She sat down again, and the fire in the hearth crackled, as if applauding her words. Outside, night was falling, and the Zmey's nest, hidden beyond the marsh, awaited. Chapter 11. The Descent. Yaga's hut disappeared behind them like a dream dissolving at waking. Once outside, they turned and saw only a circle of mushrooms and a pile of ash. The old witch had done her duty and now left them to their fate. The 3 brides were standing, still weak but conscious. Lada held Ratmir's hand, and her fingers, though cold, squeezed with a strength that spoke of a will rediscovered. I don't want you to go in, Lada said in a low voice. I felt what's in there. I felt it while I was in the water. It's a place that eats memories. If you enter, you might forget me. Ratmir took her face in his hands. I won't forget you, he said. No matter how many doors I open. Your name is written here, and he touched his chest. Not in the water. She nodded, but her eyes were full of tears. Milana, beside Dobrynya, was more silent. She looked at him with a mixture of love and fear, like one looks at a man who has just discovered himself capable of killing. Will you come back? She asked, and her voice was a whisper.
I will come back, Dobrynya said, and when I do, I will tell you everything. I will hide nothing more. Zorjana, on the other hand, did not speak. She looked at the place where the hut had disappeared, and her eyes, blue as the sky after rain, seemed to seek something that was not there. Perhaps she sought Fukol. Perhaps she sought his voice, which she would never hear again. "We must go," Ratmir said. "The nest is beyond that hill where the river breaks against the rocks. I saw the path. It is marked." They set off. The forest now grew sparser, and rocks began to emerge from the ground like fingers of buried giants. The air grew fresher, and a noise grew louder, the sound of falling water. The waterfall was enormous. The VOLCHOV, which until then had been a placid, dark river, here plunged into a precipice, falling 100 fathoms into a deep gorge, wrapped in mist. The mist was so thick that the bottom was almost invisible. But Ratmir saw the entrance. Behind the veil of water, a fissure in the rock, a narrow opening, barely sufficient for a man to pass. From there came a reddish light, pulsing like the beat of a diseased heart. "And the girls?" Dobrinja asked. "We leave them here," Ratmir said, "in the shade of the rocks. The water will protect them. The river will not touch them as long as we are inside. It's a pact." He laid Lada on a bed of moss, and she looked at him with eyes that said everything words could not say. "Come back," she murmured. "I will come back," he replied. Then he turned, and with Dobrinja at his side, headed toward the waterfall. They entered the water. The spray was icy, violent, and for a moment Ratmir thought it would sweep him away. But he clung to the rock, pushed forward, and after a final effort passed beyond the veil of water. The cave was enormous. The walls were covered with runes, thousands of runes carved into the stone, glowing with their own light, red and orange, like dying embers. The air was warm, dry, and smelled of sulfur and something sweet, like burnt honey. In the center of the cave, on an altar of black stone, were 3 objects: a golden crown, a sack of coins, and a sword blazing with its own light. The 3 doors, or perhaps the 3 temptations. There was no trace of the Zmey, but Ratmir felt it. He felt it in the vibrations of the rock, in the heat rising from the floor, in the pulsing of the runes. The Zmey was there, everywhere, watching. "The 3 doors," Dobrinja said hoarsely. "The crown, the money, the sword. Yaga was right." "Choose one," Ratmir said. "I'll take the other. The 3rd we'll leave for whoever comes." "But there are only 2 of us," Dobrinja said. Ratmir smiled, and his smile was bitter. "I know, but perhaps that's the trick. Perhaps the 3rd door is not meant to be opened. Perhaps it must be closed forever." They looked at each other. Then, without a word, they separated. Ratmir went toward the crown, Dobrinja toward the sword. The 3rd door, the door of money, remained closed, but its golden glow reflected off the walls, like an eye that never slept. And when Ratmir touched the crown, the world around him turned upside down. He found himself in a hall, an immense hall, filled with armed men shouting his name. He was king. He wore a purple robe and a crown of solid gold. At his feet an entire people bowed, and beside him, on the throne, was Lada, beautiful, with a diadem of pearls and a smile that promised eternity. "You came back," Lada said. "Now you will reign forever." Ratmir looked at his hands. They were clean.
Vukol's blood was gone. The exhaustion of the journey was gone. Only power, only glory, and for a moment, only a moment, desire was stronger than everything. But then he felt the heat. The feather of the firebird, hidden in his chest, grew warm. It burned his skin, and suddenly the hall began to tremble. The walls cracked, the golden throne became mud, and Lada's face, her beloved face, split open, revealing the void behind. The world collapsed, and Ratmir found himself again in the cave, on his knees before the altar, with the golden crown shattered into 1,000 pieces at his feet. Across the cave, Dobrinja stood with the blazing sword, but his arm trembled. "I almost gave in," Dobrinja panted. "I saw Milana. She was alive. She was happy. But then the feather burned me, and I understood. It was all false." "The third door," Ratmir said, raising his eyes. "The door of money. Who will open it?" And at that moment, the rock opened before them. The Zmey emerged from the wall. It was not a body, not a beast. It was a shadow, a mass of smoke and light writhing, with 3 pairs of red eyes looking at the intruders. Its voice, the voice of Vsevolod, but also of all the dead it had absorbed, boomed. "You passed the doors, but the third is still closed, and as long as it remains unopened, I will not die, and you will not leave." Ratmir looked at the door of money, the gold and silver shining on the other side. "We will not open it," he said. "We will leave it closed, forever." The Zmey screamed, and the cave trembled, but its voice, for the first time, had a note of fear. "Then you will die here with your choice." "Perhaps," Ratmir said, "but at least we will die as men, not as fallen gods." And he threw himself at the shadow with bare hands, and his cry mingled with Dobrinja's and with that of all the souls imprisoned in the waters of the VOLCHOV. Chapter 12. The Voice of the River. The cave filled with a scream that was not sound, but presence. It was the lament of all the souls the VOLCHOV had swallowed over the centuries, the voice of every drowned one, of every sacrificed one, of every forgotten one. The Zmey rose from the shadow like a column of smoke and fire, and its 3 heads stretched toward Ratmir and Dobrinja with a hunger that was not hunger for flesh, but for memory. Ratmir dodged the first head, Vsevolod's, rolling on the wet stone. The head grazed him, and for a moment he felt the cold of a water that was not water, but was the absence of everything warm. He felt the void of one who has ceased to hope. "You, son of Burislav," Vsevolod's head hissed, "carry your grandfather's blood. But your grandfather did not tell you everything. He did not tell you that he, too, in the end, gave in." "You lie," Ratmir shouted, rising. "Lie?" the head laughed. "Your grandfather, the last Volk of your line, came to me before he died. He came to ask me to spare his family, and I spared them. In exchange, he gave me his name, your name,
Every time you speak your name, I hear it. Every time you think of him, I am there." Ratmir felt the blood freeze in his veins. Was it possible? His grandfather, the man he had loved above all others, had made a pact with that thing? "No," he said, clenching his fists. "My grandfather would never have." "Would never have?" Vsevolod interrupted. "Then why are you here? Why did you spill his blood? Why did his blood open the way? Why did the Volchov recognize it as its own?" Ratmir had no answer. The head's words were like thorns lodging in his flesh. On the other side of the cave, Dobrynya was fighting with the second head, that of the woman with hair of algae. The creature moved with sinuous grace, and its mouth, when it opened, emitted a song that was not human. "Dobrynya," the head sang, "you killed your uncle, but it was not out of fear. It was out of love. You loved Milana more than anything, and you knew that if your uncle survived, she would never look at you. Because she loved him. He was her teacher. He was her first love." "It's not true," Dobrynya shouted, but his voice trembled. "It is true," the head whispered. "Milana went to him every night to learn the runes. But she learned other things too. And your uncle, the old Volk, looked at her with eyes that were not those of a master. You knew it. That's why you killed him. Not out of fear of the prince's warriors. Out of jealousy." Dobrynya fell to his knees. The blazing sword slipped from his hand and rolled on the stone, extinguishing. "It's true," he murmured, his voice a rasp. "It's all true. I killed him out of jealousy. I lied to myself for 3 years. But the truth is that I was a murderer." The woman's head smiled, and her algae writhed like serpents. "Now you know, and now you are mine." But as the head bent to seize Dobrynya, something unexpected happened. The third head, that of the child, which until then had remained silent, moved. Not toward Ratmir or Dobrynya, but toward the other two. Its infantile face, crying without tears, contorted into a scream. "Enough! Enough! I am no longer yours!" The child's head detached from the Zmey's body and fell on the stone with a dull sound. Then, slowly, its face melted, revealing not a child, but an old man. An old man with a long beard and blue eyes, who looked at Ratmir with a light of recognition. "Ratmir," the old man said, and his voice was weak but clear. "It's me, Burislav, your grandfather." Ratmir froze. The old man before him was his grandfather, the grandfather who had drowned 4 years earlier, the grandfather who had taught him the words of blood. "Grandfather," Ratmir murmured, and his voice broke. "Is it you? Have you been here all this time?" "I was trapped," the old man said, with a weary smile. "When the Zmey took me, it did not kill me. It kept me inside itself, as it keeps everyone. But I never gave up. I waited. I waited for you to come." "How do I free you?" Ratmir asked, kneeling beside him. "You can't," the grandfather said. "I am already dead. But I can help you free the others. The child's head was my prison. Now that I am out, the Zmey has lost a third of its strength. But the other two heads are still strong. You must strike the heart. The heart is under the altar. That's where the Zmey keeps the memories of all it has swallowed." "How do I reach it?" The grandfather smiled, and his trembling hand touched Ratmir's chest, right where the firebird's feather was hidden. "With this. The feather is not only to resist temptations, it can also wound. But once used, it will be consumed, and you will lose the memory of everything you saw here. You will forget this cave. You will forget me. You will forget the journey." Ratmir hesitated. "If I forget, how will I return to Lada?" "The heart remembers," the grandfather said. "Even if the mind forgets, the heart knows. Trust it." Then, with a final sigh, the grandfather's face melted and the child's head crumbled to ash. Ratmir rose. He felt the feather burning his chest. He gripped it between his fingers. "Dobrynya!" he shouted. "Dobrynya, get up! We must strike the heart!" But Dobrynya was still on his knees, overwhelmed by the truth the woman's head had revealed. His shoulders trembled, and his hands were clasped in a gesture of prayer addressed to no god. "I can't," he murmured. "I'm a murderer, a liar, a coward." "Then die," Ratmir said, and his voice was hard as iron. "Die here, on your knees, while Milana waits for you outside. Die knowing you did not have the courage to redeem yourself." Dobrynya looked up. His eyes were full of tears, but in them, for the first time, there was something else. Anger. "I don't want to die," he said. "I want to live. And I want Milana to know who I truly am." He rose, picked up the sword, and its flame reignited. "Show me the heart." Chapter 13. The Heart Under the Altar. The two remaining heads, the Vsevolod and the algae woman, threw themselves at them with redoubled fury. The cave trembled. The runes on the walls glowed with a red light that looked like blood, and the air grew ever hotter, as if the heart of the earth were about to explode. Ratmir and Dobrynya moved in unison, as if they had fought together all their lives. Ratmir dodged, struck, drew Vsevolod's head, while Dobrynya, with the blazing sword, held the woman's head at bay. "The heart!" Ratmir shouted. "You must reach the altar!" Dobrynya lunged forward, rolling under the woman's head's strike. The sword burned his hands, but he held it tight. He reached the altar of black stone and, with a cry that was at once a prayer and a curse, thrust it into the stone. The altar cracked. A white, blinding light gushed from the fissure, and the entire cave lit up as if the sun had risen underground. The two heads screamed. The Vsevolod writhed, his face dissolving, and for a moment Ratmir saw the face of the man he had been. A tired face, marked, with eyes that had seen too much. "Thank you," the Vsevolod whispered,
and his voice was no longer a hiss, but a sigh. "Thank you for freeing me." Then he dissolved. The algae woman's head emitted a final groan, and she too melted, dropping a handful of shells and a wooden comb on the floor. The Zmey, without heads, contracted upon itself, reduced to a mass of smoke and shadow that pulsed like a diseased heart. And at the center of that mass, Ratmir saw something. An eye. A great eye, looking at him with an ancient sadness. "Why?" the eye asked, with a voice that was both male and female, infantile and decrepit. "Why did you kill me? I was the memory. I was the remembrance. Without me, who will remember the old gods? Who will remember the forgotten prayers?" Ratmir approached the eye. The feather burned his chest, and he felt the moment had come. "I don't want to kill you," he said. "I only want you to release the souls you took, to release our brides, to release my grandfather, to release everyone." "And if I go," the eye said, "what will remain of me?" "The river will remain," Ratmir said. "The water will remain. The memory of what you were will remain, not of what you became." The eye looked at him for a long time. Then, slowly, it began to close. The mass of smoke and shadow withdrew, thinned, until only a small circle of light remained on the floor. A light that pulsed like a heart and then went out. The cave fell silent. The runes on the walls stopped glowing. The air cooled. Ratmir collapsed to the ground, exhausted. Dobrynya beside him let the sword fall, which extinguished in a cloud of sparks. "Is it over?" Dobrynya asked hoarsely. "It's over," Ratmir said. But he knew it was not entirely over. The feather still burned him. Memory was already beginning to crumble, like snow in the sun. He looked at Dobrynya. "I will forget everything," he said. "The journey, the cave, the temptations. I will forget VOLCHOV. I will forget my grandfather. I will remember only that I met you here and that we fought together." Dobrynya nodded. There was no sadness in his eyes, only a strange peace. "Then remember only this," he said. "You saved me, because you forced me to see the truth." Ratmir smiled, weakly.
Then the feather was consumed. An intense, almost unbearable heat enveloped his chest, and then went out, and with it the memory of the cave, of the runes, of the heads, of the grandfather, of everything began to fade like mist at dawn. When he awoke, he was lying on the sand, and above him was the sky, a gray sky with clouds moving slowly. Beside him, Lada. She was crying, but smiling. "You came back," she said. "You came back." Ratmir tried to remember what had happened. There had been a journey, a struggle. Had he fought something? He could not remember. But when he looked at his hand, he saw a small mark, a scar in the shape of a feather on his palm, and he felt, deep in his heart, that all was well. The VOLCHOV beyond the shore flowed placidly, and in its flowing, for the first time in 4 years, there was no more wrath. Only water.
Chapter 14. The Return. They walked for 2 days following the bank of the Volchov. The brides were still weak, but every step made them stronger. Lada held Ratmir's hand, and he, even if he did not remember what had happened in the cave, felt that his hand was the safest place in the world. Dobrynya walked beside Milana and spoke. He spoke in a low voice, and she listened. He told her everything, about his uncle, the well, the jealousy, the fear. And she, after every word, nodded and squeezed his hand. "It doesn't matter," Milana said at last. "What was, was. What matters is what you are now." And Dobrynya, for the first time, felt that perhaps it was true. Zorjana walked alone, a little behind. She did not speak much. Every now and then she stopped and looked at the river, as if searching for something. Then she resumed walking. "Zorjana," Ratmir called her. "Are you all right?" She nodded, but her eyes were distant. "Sometimes," she said, "I hear a voice calling me, but I can't understand what it says. It's like a dream I can't remember." Ratmir felt a pain in his chest, at the point where the feather had burned him. He did not remember why, but he knew Zorjana was speaking of VOLCHOV. "Perhaps," he said cautiously, "it's someone who loves you, and who is waiting for you." Zorjana looked at him, and for a moment in her eyes shone a light that was not of this world. "Perhaps," she said. Then she resumed walking. On the evening of the second day, they saw the lights of Novgorod, the towers of the fortress, the domes of the new churches, and the glow of bonfires burning along the walls. The city had returned to breathing. When they entered through the main gate, people stopped to look at them. 3 men and 3 women, covered in mud and blood, with tired but alive eyes. Someone recognized Ratmir, and a murmur spread. "The betrothed of the drowned! They have returned! They brought back their brides! They defeated the river!" The crowd gathered around them, but Ratmir did not stop. He went straight to the temple, the new wooden temple the prince had built. He entered, and before the altar he knelt. He did not pray to the new god. He did not pray to the old gods. He prayed only to the silence that now reigned over the Volchov. When he came out, Lada was waiting for him. "What did you do in there?" she asked. "I gave thanks," Ratmir said. "I don't know to whom, but I gave thanks." They embraced, and for the first time in that long night, Ratmir felt that the cold that had accompanied him since the day of Mirena's discovery was finally beginning to thaw. Chapter 15. The Last Song. Night fell over Novgorod, but no one slept. In houses, in squares, along the riverbanks, people spoke of the miracle. The 3 maidens had returned. The river was calm. And the 3 heroes, Ratmir, Dobrynya, and the mute VOLCHOV, who was not there, had become legend. But Ratmir did not want to be a legend. He only wanted to sit by the fire with Lada and forget. Forget the pain, the fear, the fatigue, and perhaps, with time, even the memory that eluded him. They sat on the bank, away from the crowd. The Volchov flowed placidly, and the moon reflected on its surface like a silver coin. "I don't remember everything," Ratmir said in a low voice. "I remember we left. I remember VOLCHOV was there. And then a void. And then the shore. It's strange." "It doesn't matter," Lada said. "I remember for you. I remember you entered the river, you fought, you returned. That's enough." Ratmir looked at her. Her face was illuminated by the moon, and for a moment he seemed to see in her something more, something that went beyond flesh, beyond time. "I love you," he said. "I know," she replied. "I have always loved you." And as they kissed, the river murmured a song no one heard, but everyone felt in their hearts. It was the voice of the Volchov, which, for the first time, after 4 years, sang of peace. And in that song there was also another voice, a mute voice, speaking without words, the voice of Vukhol, saying, "Zoryana, I loved you. I love you. I will always love you." Zoryana, in her house, woke with a start. She felt Vukhol's name on her lips, even though she had not spoken it. She smiled, and for the first time since her return, her tears were tears of joy. The Volchov that night took no one. It welcomed only one last soul, Vukhol's, which joined the river as a leaf joins the wind. And the river, finally, had peace. It is not the end, it is only the beginning of a new memory. Intermezzo, the mute's dream. Vukhol dreamed. He did not know if he was alive or dead, but he dreamed. He was on a shore, and the water was clear. Beside him, a figure with no face, but with the voice of all the women he had loved. "You are here," the figure said, "finally." "Where am I?" Vukhol asked, and his voice was clear, full, as it had never been. "You are in memory," the figure said, "in the memory the river keeps for all those who gave their lives for it." "And Zoryana?" Vukhol asked. "Will she be all right?" The figure smiled. "She will always love you, even if she no longer sees you, even if she no longer hears your voice. Your love is written in the water, and the water does not forget." Vukhol closed his eyes. He no longer felt the weight of silence, only the lightness of one who has finally found his voice. And as the river flowed, his voice mingled with the song and became part of it, forever. Chapter 16. The Wedding of Silence. 3 weeks passed since the return. 3 weeks of slow healing, of quiet nights, and of days when the sun, for the first time in a long while, seemed to have a warmth that did not burn, but warmed. Novgorod resumed living. The market filled with voices, the fishermen returned to cast their nets in the Volchov, and the priests, in their new wooden churches, thanked their God for the peace regained. But Ratmir knew that peace was fragile. He felt it in his bones, as one feels the coming of rain. Every night he dreamed of water, not of the threatening river of before, but of a calm surface in which reflected a face he could not recognize, a mute face with silver eyes. "Who are you?" he asked in the dream. But the face did not answer. It smiled and then dissolved in the water. Lada, beside him, felt him stir. One night she woke him with a light touch. "Ratmir," she whispered, "talk to me. What do you see in your dreams?" "I see a man," Ratmir said, sitting up in bed. "A man I don't know, but who I feel I should remember. He has silver eyes, and he seems sad,
or perhaps at peace. I can't tell." Lada looked at him with eyes that knew more than they said. She remembered. She had seen VOLCHOV in the water, seen him fight, seen him die. But she knew Ratmir could not remember. The feather had taken that memory away, like a river carries away dry leaves. "Perhaps," Lada said cautiously, "he is a friend who helped you and now watches over you." "Perhaps," Ratmir said, and lay down again. But that night he could not sleep again. He lay awake, listening to Lada's breathing and the distant sound of the VOLCHOV, flowing placidly like a lullaby. Dobrynya, meanwhile, did not sleep at all. He spent his nights sitting on the riverbank, watching the water glisten under the moon. Every night he carried with him a small object, a wooden comb he had found in the cave after the battle. The comb of the algae woman's head. He did not know why he had taken it. Perhaps to remind himself that the truth, even the most painful, is better than a lie. One night Milana joined him. "You're always here," she said, sitting beside him. "You never come to bed." "I can't sleep," Dobrynya said. "When I close my eyes, I see the well. I see my uncle falling. I see his eyes asking me why." "And what do you answer?" Milana asked. "I answer that I was afraid," Dobrynya said. "But that's no longer true. Now I know it wasn't fear. It was anger, envy, jealousy. I killed him because he looked at you, and I couldn't bear it." Milana was silent for a long moment. Then, gently, she took the comb from Dobrynya's hands. "I know," she said. "I always knew. Uncle Vsevolod taught me the runes, it's true. But I did not love him. He was only a teacher. And when he died, I wept for him, but not for love. I wept for you, because I knew you had stained your hands with a blood you could never wash away." Dobrynya looked at her, and his eyes were full of a gratitude that had no words. "And now?" he asked. "Now what do you think of me?" Milana took his face in her hands. "I think you are a man who has killed, but who has also saved. I think you are a man who has lied, but who now speaks the truth. I think you are the man I love, and whom I want to marry." Dobrynya burst into tears, tears that were not of pain, but of liberation. They embraced, and the river, as if it understood, murmured a sweet melody. The next morning, Ratmir met Dobrynya on the market square. "We are alive," Ratmir said with a weary smile. "We are alive," Dobrynya confirmed. "And our brides await us." "I know." "Then let's do what we were supposed to do 4 weeks ago. Let's marry them." Dobrynya nodded. Then, hesitating, he added, "And VOLCHOV? What do we do for VOLCHOV?" Ratmir felt a void in his stomach. The name was familiar, but he did not remember. VOLCHOV, the mute, the third of their group. What had happened to him? "I don't remember," he admitted. "I don't remember what happened to him. But I know we must honor him, as one honors a hero." "As one honors a hero," Dobrynya repeated. "We will bury him in the river,
where he belongs." And so they did. 3 days later, on the bank of the Volchov, a funeral was held. There was no coffin, no body, only a crown of wild flowers which Ratmir threw into the water, and a prayer which Dobrynya recited in a language none of those present understood, but which all felt in their hearts. Zorjana stood in the front row. When the crown touched the water, she heard a voice she knew even though she had never heard it, a voice that said her name, Zorjana. She smiled, and her tears fell into the river, mingling with those of the Volchov. Then, the following week, the weddings were held. Chapter 17. The Crown of Water. On the wedding day, the sky was clear as it had not been in months. The sun shone high, and the Volchov, beneath its rays, glowed like a strip of silver. All Novgorod was in celebration. The streets were decked with colored cloths, the bells of the new churches rang out, and the priests, blessing the couples, did not ask whether the spouses had been baptized. For that day, faith did not matter. Only love mattered. Ratmir wore a white linen shirt embroidered by Lada with silver threads. His blonde hair, which during the journey had turned gray from strain, had regained its color. The scar on his cheek, the ancient wound of battle, seemed less deep, as if peace had begun to erase it. Lada beside him was radiant. Her dress was of blue silk, like the sky, and her hair, which had been black and empty when he found her, had returned to its natural color, a light brown woven with pearl ribbons. Her eyes, blue and clear, looked at Ratmir with a light that needed no words. "You are beautiful," Ratmir said. "I know," Lada replied, smiling. "But it's not for myself I dressed up. It's for you. I want you to remember this day, even if you forget everything else." Ratmir felt a lump in his throat. He knew she referred to his memory loss, to the feather that had burned his memories. But at that moment, it did not matter. The only thing that mattered was her. "I won't forget this," he said. "This is carved in my heart." They kissed, and the crowd erupted in a cry of joy. Dobrynya and Milana stood beside them. Dobrynya, for the first time in years, did not wear his hood. The sign of Perun on his temple was still visible, but he no longer hid it. It was his past, and he wore it with pride, like a scar that tells a story. Milana wore a red dress, like fire, and her black hair was loose on her shoulders, like a cascade of night. Her eyes, which had been black and empty in the water, were now a warm brown, glowing like oak wood. "I love you," Dobrynya whispered. "I know," Milana replied. "Now come. The crowd awaits us." And the third couple? Zorjana was there, standing beside them, but she wore no wedding dress. She wore a simple gray linen dress, and on her copper hair there was no flower crown, but a black ribbon. The ribbon of mourning. "Zorjana," Ratmir said, approaching her. "You don't have to be here if you don't want to." "I want to," she replied firmly. "I want to see happiness. I want to remember that love exists, even when everything seems lost." The ceremony was held on the bank of the Volchov, right where the river widened into a small bay. The priests, in their dark vestments, recited the prayers of the new rite. But at the end of the ceremony, Ratmir made a gesture no one expected. He turned to the river, knelt, and dipped his hands in the water. Then, rising, he blessed the Volchov with a sign that was not Christian, but not pagan either. It was a sign that came from the heart. "Thank you," he said, addressing the river. "Thank you for giving us back what we love." The Volchov, in response, sent a small wave to the shore, a caress of water that wet everyone's feet. The priests crossed themselves, worried, but the crowd laughed and Ratmir smiled.
Then the weddings were celebrated, and all night the city danced. Young and old, rich and poor, Christians and those who still in secret prayed to the ancient gods. For one night, Novgorod was one family. Zorzhana remained on the bank, watching the water. She did not dance, she did not sing, but when the moon rose high and the stars reflected in the Volchov, she heard the voice again. "Zorzhana, Fukol," she whispered, "are you here?" The water did not answer, but in the ripples spreading on the surface, she saw the reflection of a face that was laughing, a face that was at peace. And she, for the first time in weeks, smiled. "I love you," she said, "and I will always love you." Then she rose, turned, and returned to the celebration. The river that night sang a song no one heard, but everyone felt in their hearts. It was a song of farewell and welcome. It was the voice of Vukol, who finally, after 30 years of silence, had found the words to say, "Farewell, Zorzhana, and thank you." Epilogue: The Voice of the River. 1 year later. The Volchov flowed placidly, as if it had never known wrath. Fishermen cast their nets, children splashed on the shore, and women, in their gardens, sang songs of love and harvest. Ratmir and Lada lived in a small house near the river. They were not rich, but they did not need to be. They had water, sun, and the sound of a child's laughter who, somewhere, had just learned to walk. Dobrynya and Milana had become the keepers of the small temple on the bank. Not a Christian temple, not a pagan sanctuary, but a place where anyone could come to speak with the water. And the water sometimes answered, not with words, but with a ripple, a reflection, a feeling of peace. And Zorzhana? Zorzhana had become the village healer. She knew herbs, knew roots, knew the words that could soothe pain. But she healed not only bodies, she also healed souls, because she had learned on her own skin that the deepest pain is that which cannot be spoken. One evening, Ratmir and Lada sat on the bank watching the sunset. "I don't remember everything," Ratmir said, as he had said many times. "But I remember that I love you. This I will never forget." "I know," Lada said, resting her head on his shoulder. "And that's enough." The Volchov, at that moment, glowed with a golden light, and in the light Ratmir saw something. A figure, a tall man with silver eyes smiling from the water. A man who had no voice but spoke with his eyes. "Who are you?" Ratmir asked, but the figure had already vanished. Lada looked at him. "What did you see?" "I don't know," Ratmir said, "but it was someone I knew, someone I loved, someone who saved me." Lada smiled,
and a tear ran down her face. "Yes," she said, "he was a friend who loved you enough to give his life for you." Ratmir looked at her, and in his eyes, for a moment, shone the light of memory. Only a moment. Then it went out, like a flame extinguished by the wind. But it did not matter. The heart remembered. And the heart, sometimes, is stronger than memory. The river continued to flow, and in its current, mixed with water and light, there was a voice that spoke no words, but sang a song of love, of loss, and of a silence that, finally, had found its voice. Moral: one cannot throw the old gods into the river and hope they drown. Their wrath does not die. It transforms. It becomes water, becomes wind, becomes the memory of a pain we did not have the courage to face. But if we have the courage to face it, to acknowledge it, to say to it, "I saw you, I heard you, and I will not forget you," then the wrath is appeased, and the river, finally, sings again. The End. The VOLCHOV flows on. It remembers everything: the gods who were cast into its waters, the prayers that were whispered on its banks, the love that refused to die even when memory faded. And now, as the river carries these words into the distance, we leave our heroes to their peace. Ratmir, who found love beyond forgetting; Dobrynya, who found truth beyond guilt; and Vucol, the silent one, who found his voice in the endless song of the water. Their story is over, but the river still sings, and if you listen closely, on a quiet night, when the moon is full and the mist rises from the VOLCHOV, you might just hear it, the voice of all those who loved and lost and loved again. This has been The Wrath of the VOLCHOV, a dark fantasy novel of ancient Rus, written by Anna Gogoleva. Special thanks to the spirits of the old gods who never truly leave, the river VOLCHOV, which remembers everything, the keepers of Slavic folklore, whose stories live on in the water, the forest, and the wind, and to the listeners for embarking on this journey into the heart of ancient Rus. The Wrath of the VOLCHOV. Copyright 2026 by Anna Gogoleva. All rights reserved. This audiobook is a work of fiction.